2. If you're unable to get a referral from someone you trust, you may be able to find a fee-only financial planner through www.naphefe.org or www.fainly.org, whose members are generally held to high standards of service and integrity.
2. 如果你无法从你信任的人那里得到推荐，你可能可以通过 3w.naphefe.org 或 3w.fainly.org 找到一个只收费的财务规划师，其成员通常被要求提供高标准的服务和诚信。
3. By itself, a customer complaint is not enough to disqualify an advisor from your consideration, but a persistent pattern of complaints is. And a disciplinary action by state or federal regulators usually tells you to find another advisor. Another source for checking a broker's record is http://pdpi.nasdr.com/pdpi.
三仅凭一个客户的投诉就足以让一个顾问失去你的考虑，但是持续的投诉模式是，而州或联邦监管机构的纪律行动通常告诉你要找另一个顾问。检查经纪人记录的另一个来源是 http://pdpi.nasdr.com/pdpi。
For Robert Verez, editor and publisher of the Inside Information newsletter, generously shared these responses for this book. Other checklists of questions can be found at www.cfb-board.org and www.naphefe.org.
4. Inside Information 新闻简报的编辑和出版商 Robert Verez 慷慨地分享了这些回答给这本书。其他的问题清单可以在 3w.cfp-board.org 和 3w.naphefe.org 找到。
5. Credentials like the CFA, CFP, or CPA tell you that the advisor has taken and passed a rigorous course of study. Most of the other alphabet soup of credentials brandished by financial planners, including the CFM or the CMFC, signify very little. More important, by contacting the organization that awards the credential, you can verify his record and check that he has not been disciplined for violations of rules or ethics.
5项 CFA、CFP 或 CPA 这样的证书表明，顾问已经通过了严格的学习课程。大多数其他金融规划师所展示的字母汤证书，包括 CFM 或 CMFC， 意义不大。更重要的是，通过联系颁发证书的组织，你可以验证他的记录，检查他是否因违反规则或道德而受到惩罚。
6. If you have less than $100,000 to invest, you may not be able to find a financial advisor who will take your account. In that case, buy a diversified basket of low-cost index funds, follow the behavioral advice throughout this book, and your portfolio should eventually grow to the level at which you can afford an advisor.
6. 如果你的投资少于10万美元，你可能找不到愿意接受你账户的金融顾问。在这种情况下，购买一篮子低成本指数基金，遵循本书中的行为建议，你的投资组合应该最终能够增长到你能负担得起顾问的水平。
The National Federation of Financial Analysts is now the Association for Investment Management and Research. Its quarterly research publication, the Financial Analyst Journal, now appears every other month.
星号国家金融分析师联合会现在是投资管理和研究协会，其季度研究出版物《金融分析师杂志》现在每2个月出版一次。
The higher the growth rate you project, and the longer the future period over which you project it, the more sensitive your forecast becomes to the slightest error. If, for instance, you estimate that a company earning $1 per share can raise that profit by 15% a year for the next 15 years, its earnings would end up at $8.14. If the market values the company at 35 times earnings, the stock would finish the period at roughly $285. But if earnings grow at 14% instead of 15%, the company would earn $7.14 at the end of the period, and, in the shock of that shortfall, investors would no longer be willing to pay 35 times earnings. At, say, 20 times earnings, the stock would end up around $140 per share, or more than 50% less. Because advanced mathematics gives the appearance of precision to the inherently iffy process of foreseeing the future, investors must be highly skeptical of anyone who claims to hold any complex computational key to basic financial problems. As Graham put it, in 44 years of Wall Street experience and study, I have never seen dependable calculations made about common stock values or related investment policies that went beyond simple arithmetic or the most elementary algebra. Whenever calculus is brought in, or higher algebra, you could take it as a warning signal that the operator was trying to substitute theory for experience, and usually also to give to speculation the deceptive guise of investment. See page 570.
星号你预测的增长率越高，预测的未来期间越长，你的预测就越容易受到最微小的错误的影响。例如，如果你估计一家公司每股盈利$1，可以在接下来的15年里每年增长15%，那么它的盈利最终会达到$8.14。如果市场将该公司的估值定为35倍盈利，那么股票在该期间结束时大约会达到$285。但是，如果盈利增长率是14%而不是15%，那么该公司在期末的盈利将是$7.14。由于这种短缺的震惊，投资者将不再愿意支付35倍的盈利。假设以20倍的盈利，股票最终会在每股约$140，或者减少50%以上。因为高级数学给预见未来的过程带来了精确的外观，投资者必须对任何声称拥有解决基本金融问题的复杂计算密钥的人持高度怀疑态度。正如格雷厄姆所说，在我44年的华尔街经验和研究中，我从未见过关于普通股价值或相关投资政策的可靠计算超过了简单的算术或最基本的代数。每当引入微积分或更高级的代数时，你可以把它当作一个警告信号。操作者试图用理论代替经验，通常也是给投机赋予投资的欺骗性外观。见第570页。
Asterisk in 1972, an investor in corporate bonds had little choice but to assemble his or her own portfolio. Today, roughly 500 mutual funds invest in corporate bonds, creating a convenient, well-diversified bundle of securities. Since it is not feasible to build a diversified bond portfolio on your own unless you have at least $100,000. The typical intelligent investor will be best off simply buying a low-cost bond fund and leaving the painstaking labor of credit research to its managers. For more on bond funds, see the commentary on Chapter 4.
星号1972年，投资公司债券的投资者几乎没有选择，只能自己组建投资组合。如今，大约有500家共同基金投资于公司债券，创建了一个方便的、多元化的证券包。由于除非你至少有$10万，否则自己建立一个多元化的债券投资组合是不可行的，所以普通的聪明投资者最好只是购买一个低成本的债券基金，把信用研究的繁琐工作留给他的经理。关于债券基金的更多信息，请参阅第4章的评论。
Asterisk by junior stock issues, Graham means shares of common stock. Preferred stock is considered senior to common stock because the company must pay all dividends on the preferred before paying any dividends on the common.
星号格雷厄姆所说的次级股票发行指的是普通股。优先股被认为是高级股票，因为公司必须在支付任何普通股的股息之前支付所有的优先股股息。
Asterisk after investors lost billions of dollars on the shares of recklessly assembled utility companies in 1929 to 1932. Congress authorized the SEC to regulate the issuance of utility stocks under the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935.
星号在1929至1932年，投资者在草率组建的公用事业公司的股票上损失了数十亿美元后，国会授权 SEC 根据1935年的公用事业控股公司法案来监管公用事业股票的发行。
Asterisk in more recent years, most mutual funds have almost robotically mimicked the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index, lest any different holdings cause their returns to deviate from that of the index. In a countertrend, some fund companies have launched what they call focused portfolios, which own 25 to 50 stocks that the managers declare to be their best ideas. That leaves investors wondering whether the other funds run by the same managers contain their worst ideas. Considering that most of the best idea funds do not markedly outperform the averages, investors are also entitled to wonder whether the manager's ideas are even worth having in the first place. For indisputably skilled investors like Warren Buffett, wide diversification would be foolish, since it would water down the concentrated force of a few great ideas. But for the typical fund manager or individual investor, not diversifying is foolish, since it is so difficult to select a limited number of stocks that will include most winners and exclude most losers. As you own more stocks, the damage any single loser can cause will decline, and the odds of owning all the big winners will rise. The ideal choice for most investors is a total stock market index fund, a low-cost way to hold every stock worth owning.
星号近年来，大多数共同基金几乎机械地模仿标准普尔500股票指数，以免任何不同的持有股票导致它们的回报与该指数偏离。作为一个反趋势，一些基金公司推出了他们称之为聚焦投资组合，这些投资组合拥有25到50只股票，经理们宣称这些是他们的最佳想法。这让投资者不禁怀疑，由同一经理管理的其他基金是否包含他们的最差想法。考虑到大多数最佳想法基金并没有显著超过平均水平，投资者也有权怀疑经理们的想法是否值得拥有。对于像沃伦·巴菲特这样无可争议的熟练投资者来说，广泛的多元化将是愚蠢的，因为它会稀释少数几个伟大想法的集中力量。但对于典型的基金经理或个人投资者来说，不进行多元化是愚蠢的，因为选择一定数量的股票，包括大多数赢家和排除大多数输家是非常困难的。随着你持有的股票越来越多，任何单一的亏损股票能造成的损害将会减少，拥有所有大赢家的几率将会增加。对于大多数投资者来说，最理想的选择是全股市指数基金，这是一种低成本的方式，可以持有所有值得拥有的股票。
Graham's point about chemical and oil companies in the 1960s applies to nearly every industry in nearly every time period. Wall Street's consensus view of the future for any given sector is usually either too optimistic or too pessimistic. Worse, the consensus is at its most cheery just when the stocks are most overpriced and gloomiest just when they are cheapest. The most recent example, of course, is technology and telecommunication stocks, which hit record highs when their future seemed brightest in 1999 and early 2000, and then crashed all the way through 2002. History proves that Wall Street's expert forecasters are equally inept at predicting the performance of 1. the market as a whole, 2. industry sectors, and 3. specific stocks. As Graham points out, the odds that individual investors can do any better are not good. The intelligent investor excels by making decisions that are not dependent on the accuracy of anybody's forecasts, including his or her own. See Chapter 8.
星号格雷厄姆关于1960年代化学和石油公司的观点适用于几乎所有的行业和几乎所有的时间段。华尔街对任何特定行业未来的共识观点通常要么过于乐观，要么过于悲观。更糟糕的是，当股票最高估的时候，共识观点最乐观，而当股票最便宜的时候，共识观点最悲观。最近的例子，当然是科技和电信股，他们在1999年和2000年初的未来看起来最明亮时，达到了历史新高，然后在2002年全年一路下跌。历史证明，华尔街的专家预测者在预测1. 市场整体、2. 行业部门和3. 特定股票的表现方面同样无能。正如格雷厄姆指出的，个人投资者能做得更好的可能性并不大。聪明的投资者通过做出不依赖于任何人预测准确性的决策来表现出色，包括他或他自己的预测。参见第8章。
This figure, now known as the dividend payout ratio, has dropped considerably since Graham's day as American tax law discouraged investors from seeking, and corporations from paying, dividends. As of year-end 2002, the payout ratio stood at 34.1% for the S&P 500 stock index, and, as recently as April 2000, it hit an all-time low of just 25.3%. See www.barra.com research/fundamentals.asp. We discuss dividend policy more thoroughly in the commentary on Chapter 19.
星号这个数字现在被称为股息支付比率，自格雷厄姆时代以来已经大幅下降，因为美国税法阻止了投资者寻求以及公司支付股息。截至2002年底，标准普尔500股票指数的支付比率为 34.1%， 最近在2000年4月，它达到了历史最低的 25.3%。参见 3w.barra.com/research/fundamentals.asp。我们在第19章的评论中更深入地讨论了股息政策。
Why is this? Why the rule of 72 at 10% interest a given amount of money doubles in just over 7 years, while at 7% it doubles in just over 10 years. When interest rates are high, the amount of money you need to set aside today to reach a given value in the future is lower, since those high interest rates will enable it to grow at a more rapid rate. Thus, a rise in interest rates today makes a future stream of earnings or dividends less valuable, since the alternative of investing in bonds has become relatively more attractive.
星号这是为什么呢？根据72法则，在10%的利率下，一定数量的钱在7年多一点的时间里就会翻倍，而在7%的利率下，它在10年多一点的时间里就会翻倍。当利率较高时，你今天需要储备的金额以达到未来的某个价值就会较低，因为那些高利率会使它以更快的速度增长。因此，今天利率的上升使得未来的收益或股息流变得不那么有价值，因为投资债券的替代方案变得相对更有吸引力。
These industry groups, ideally, would not be overly dependent on such unforeseeable factors as fluctuating interest rates or the future direction of prices for raw materials like oil or metals. Possibilities might be industries like gaming, cosmetics, alcoholic beverages, nursing homes, or waste management.
星号这些行业群体，理想情况下不会过度依赖于如波动的利率或原材料，如石油或金属、未来价格走向等不可预见的因素。可能的行业可能包括游戏、化妆品、酒精饮料、养老院或废物管理等。
One, because so few of today's individual investors buy or should buy individual bonds, we will limit this discussion to stock analysis. For more on bond funds, see the commentary on Chapter 4.
亦由于如今的个人投资者很少购买或者应该购买个别债券，我们将把这个讨论限制在股票分析上。关于债券基金的更多信息，请参阅第4章的评论。
You should also get at least 1 year's worth of quarterly reports on Form 10Q. By definition, we are assuming that you are an enterprising investor willing to devote a considerable amount of effort to your portfolio. If the steps in this chapter sound like too much work to you, then you are not temperamentally well suited to picking your own stocks. You cannot reliably obtain the results you imagine unless you put in the kind of effort we described.
2. 你还应该至少获取1年的季度报告，在10Q 表格上。按定义，我们假设你是一个愿意为你的投资组合付出大量努力的进取投资者。如果这一章中的步骤对你来说像是太多的工作，那么你在选择自己的股票方面并不适合。除非你付出我们所描述的那种努力，否则你无法可靠地获得你想象的结果。
3. You can usually find details on acquisitions in the Management's Discussion and Analysis section of Form 10K. Cross-check it against the footnotes to the financial statements. For more on serial acquirers, see the commentary on Chapter 12.
3. 你通常可以在10K 表格的管理层讨论和分析部分找到关于收购的详细信息，并将其与财务报表的角注进行对照。关于连续收购者，请参阅第12章的评论。
For to determine whether a company is an OPM addict, read the statement of cash flows in the financial statements. This page breaks down the company's cash inflows and outflows into operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. If cash from operating activities is consistently negative, while cash from financing activities is consistently positive, the company has a habit of craving more cash than its own businesses can produce, and you should not join the enablers of that habitual abuse. For more on Global Crossing, see the commentary on Chapter 12. For more on WorldCom, see the sidebar in the commentary on Chapter 6.
4. 要确定一家公司是否是 OPM 成瘾者，阅读财务报表中的现金流量表。这一页将公司的现金流入和流出分为经营活动、投资活动和融资活动。如果经营活动的现金流量持续为负，而融资活动的现金流量持续为正，那么这家公司就有依赖于其自身业务无法产生的现金的习惯。你不应该加入那些助纣为虐的人。关于 Global Crossing 的更多信息，请参阅第12章的评论。关于 WorldCom 的更多信息，请参阅第6章评论中的侧边栏。
5. For more insight into moats, see the classic book Competitive Strategy by Harvard Business School professor Michael E. Porter, Free Press, New York, 1998.
5. 想要对护城河有更深入的了解，可以参阅哈佛商学院教授迈克尔·伊伯特 （Michael E. Porter） 的经典著作《竞争策略》（Free Press, New York, 1998。
6. See Cyrus A. Ramazani, Luke Sonnen, and Alan Young, Growth, Corporate Profitability, and Value Creation, Financial Analyst Journal, November/December 2002, pages 56 to 67. Also available at http://cyrus.cob.calpoly.edu.
六参见 Cyrus A. Ramazani、Luke Sonnen 和 Alan Yang 的增长、公司盈利能力和价值创造。金融分析师杂志，2002年12/11月，第56-67页。也可在 http://cyrus.cob.calpoly.edu 上查看。
7. Jason Zweig is an employee of AOL Time Warner and holds options in the company. For more about how stock options work, see the commentary on Chapter 19, page 507.
7. Jason Zweig 是 AOL Time Warner 的员工，并持有该公司的期权。关于股票期权的工作原理的更多信息，请参阅第19章的评论，第507页。
8. See Note 19 in the commentary on Chapter 19, page 508.
8. 参见第19章评论中的注释19，第508页。
9. For more on these issues, see the commentary on Chapter 12 in the superb essay by Joseph Fuller and Michael C. Jensen, Just Say No to Wall Street, at http://papers.ssrn.com.
9. 关于这些问题的更多信息，请参阅第12章的评论以及 Joseph Fuller 和 Michael C. Jensen 的精彩文章。对华尔街说不，网址为 http://papers.ssrn.com。
10. Stock splits are discussed further in the commentary on Chapter 13.
10. 股票拆分的问题将在第13章的评论中进一步讨论。
Asterisk dilution is one of many words that describe stocks in the language of fluid dynamics. A stock with high trading volume is said to be liquid. When a company goes public in an IPO, it floats its shares. And, in earlier days, a company that drastically diluted its shares with large amounts of convertible debt or multiple offerings of common stock was said to have watered its stock. This term is believed to have originated with the legendary market manipulator Daniel Drew, 1797 to 1879, who began as a livestock trader. He would drive his cattle south toward Manhattan, force-feeding them salt along the way. When they got to the Harlem River, they would guzzle huge volumes of water to slake their thirst. Drew would then bring them to market, where the water they had just drunk would increase their weight. That enabled him to get a much higher price, since cattle on the hoof is sold by the pound. Drew later watered the stock of the Erie Railroad by massively issuing new shares without warning.
星号稀释是流体动力学语言中描述股票的众多词汇之一。交易量大的股票被称为流动性强。当一家公司进行 IPO 公开上市时，它会浮动其股份。而在早些时候，一家公司如果大量稀释其股份，通过大量的可转换债务或多次发行普通股，就被说成是灌水了它的股票。这个术语据信起源于传奇的市场操纵者 Daniel Drew 1797至1879，他最初是一名牲畜交易商。他会驱赶他的牛群向曼哈顿南部行进，在途中强迫他们吃盐。当他们到达哈莱姆河时，他们会大口喝水以解渴。然后 Drew 会把他们带到市场，他们刚刚喝下的水会增加他们的体重，这使他能以更高的价格卖出，因为活牛是按磅卖的。Drew 后来通过大量无预警的发行新股，对伊利铁路公司的股票进行了灌水。
Graham is referring to the precise craftsmanship of the immigrant Italian stone carvers who ornamented the otherwise plain facades of buildings throughout New York in the early 1900s. Accountants, likewise, can transform simple financial facts into intricate and even incomprehensible patterns.
Graham 在这里提到的是20世纪初在纽约各处装饰建筑平淡无奇的外墙的意大利移民石匠的精细工艺。同样，会计师也可以将简单的财务事实转化为复杂甚至难以理解的模式。
The king probably took his inspiration from a once famous essay by the English writer William Hazlitt, who mused about a sundial near Venice that bore the words Horas non numero nisi serenus, or, I count only the hours that are serene. Companies that chronically exclude bad news from their financial results on the pretext that negative events are extraordinary or non-recurring are taking a page from Hazlitt, who urged his readers to take no note of time but by its benefits, to watch only for the smiles and neglect the frowns of fate, to compose our lives of bright and gentle moments, turning away to the sunny side of things, and letting the rest slip from our imaginations, unheeded or forgotten. William Hazlitt, on a sundial, ca. 1827. Unfortunately, investors must always count the sunny and dark hours alike.
星号国王可能是从英国作家威廉·哈兹利特的一篇曾经著名的文章中得到灵感的。他在文章中思考了威尼斯附近的一个日晷，上面写着拉丁文 Horus non numero nisi serenus， 意思是我只计算晴朗的时间。那些经常从财务结果中排除坏消息的公司，以特殊或非经常性事件为借口，正是在效仿哈兹利特。他敦促读者只关注时间的好处，只关注命运的微笑，而忽视它的皱眉，让我们的生活由明亮和温柔的时刻组成，转向事物的阳光面，让其余的从我们的想象中滑落，被忽视或遗忘。威廉·哈兹利特关于日晷，约1827年。不幸的是，投资者必须始终计算晴朗和阴暗的时间。
The company to which Graham refers so coyly appears to be American Machine and Foundry, or AMF Corporation, one of the most jumbled conglomerates of the late 1960s. It was a predecessor of today's AMF Bowling Worldwide, which operates bowling alleys and manufactures bowling equipment.
星号 Graham 所含蓄地提到的公司，似乎是美国机器和铸造公司，或 AMF Corp。这是20世纪60年代末最混乱的大公司之一。它是今天的 AMF Bowling Worldwide 的前身。该公司经营保龄球馆，并制造保龄球设备。
Nowadays, investors need to be aware of several other accounting factors that can distort reported earnings. One is pro forma, or as if financial statements, which report a company's earnings as if generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, did not apply. Another is the dilutive effect of issuing millions of stock options for executive compensation, then buying back millions of shares to keep those options from reducing the value of the common stock. A third is unrealistic assumptions of return on the company's pension funds, which can artificially inflate earnings in good years and depress them in bad. Another is special purpose entities, or affiliated firms or partnerships that buy risky assets or liabilities of the company and thus remove those financial risks from the company's balance sheet. Another element of distortion is the treatment of marketing or other soft costs as assets of the company, rather than as normal expenses of doing business. We will briefly examine such practices in the commentary that accompanies this chapter.
星号现在，投资者需要注意几个其他的会计因素，这些因素可能会扭曲报告的收益。其中一个是按公允的或假设的财务报表，这些报表按照如果通用会计准则 GAAP 不适用的情况来报告公司的收益。另一个是发行数百万股股票期权作为高管薪酬的稀释效应，然后回购数百万股股票，以防止这些期权降低普通股的价值。第三个是对公司养老金基金回报的不切实际的假设，这可能在好年份人为的提高收益，在坏年份则压低收益。另一个是特殊目的实体，或者说是购买公司的风险资产或负债的关联公司或合伙企业，从而将这些财务风险从公司的资产负债表中移除。扭曲的另一个元素是将营销或其他软性成本视为公司的资产，而不是做生意的正常费用。我们将在附带这一章的评论中简要地检查这些做法。
Northwest Industries was the holding company for, among other businesses, the Chicago and Northwestern Railway Company and Union Underwear, the maker of both BVD and Fruit of the Loom briefs. It was taken over in 1985 by over-indebted financier William Farley, who ran the company into the ground. Fruit of the Loom was bought in a bankruptcy proceeding by Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway Incorporated in early 2002.
星号 Northwest Industries 是 Chicago and Northwestern Railway Co. 和 Union Underwear、BVD 和 Fruit of the Loom 内裤的制造商等其他业务的控股公司。1985年，他被负债累累的金融家威廉·法利接管，他把公司搞垮了。Fruit of the Loom 在破产程序中被沃伦·巴菲特的伯克希尔·哈撒韦公司在2002年初购买。
Graham is referring to the provision of federal tax law that allows corporations to carry forward their net operating losses. As the tax code now stands, these losses can be carried forward for up to 20 years, reducing the company's tax liability for the entire period and thus raising its earnings after tax. Therefore, investors should consider whether recent severe losses could actually improve the company's net earnings in the future.
星号 Graham 在这里提到的是联邦税法的规定， 允许公司向前携带他们的净营业亏损。根据现行的税法，这些亏损可以向前携带长达20年，减少公司在整个期间的税务责任，从而提高其税后收益。因此，投资者应考虑最近的严重亏损是否实际上可能提高公司未来的净收益。
Investors should keep these words at hand and remind themselves of them frequently. Stock valuations are really dependable only in exceptional cases. While the prices of most stocks are approximately right most of the time, the price of a stock and the value of its business are almost never identical. The market's judgment on price is often unreliable. Unfortunately, the margin of the market's pricing errors is often not wide enough to justify the expense of trading on them. The intelligent investor must carefully evaluate the costs of trading and taxes before attempting to take advantage of any price discrepancy and should never count on being able to sell for the exact price currently quoted in the market.
投资者应该牢记这些话，并经常提醒自己，股票估值只在特殊情况下才真正可靠。虽然大多数股票的价格大部分时间都大致正确，但股票的价格和其业务的价值几乎永远不相同。市场对价格的判断经常不可靠。不幸的是，市场的定价错误的幅度通常不足以证明交易的费用。聪明的投资者在试图利用任何价格差异之前，必须仔细评估交易和税收的成本，并且永远不应该指望能以市场当前报价的确切价格出售。
*mean figure refers to the simple or arithmetic average that Graham describes in the preceding sentence.
星号平均数指的是格雷厄姆在前一句中描述的简单或算术平均数。
A 3/5 of special charges of 82 cents in 1970 deducted here.
第1970年82美分的特殊费用中的3/5在此处被扣除。
Graham appears to be using earnings on capital funds in the traditional sense of return on book value, essentially, net income divided by the company's tangible net assets.
星号格雷厄姆似乎在传统意义上使用资本基金的收益，即净收入除以公司的有形净资产。
*see pages 299 to 301.
星号请参见第299-301页。
Recent history and a mountain of financial research have shown that the market is unkindest to rapidly growing companies that suddenly report a fall in earnings. More moderate and stable growers, as Alcoa was in Graham's day or Anheuser-Busch and Colgate-Palmolive are in our time, tend to suffer somewhat milder stock declines if they report disappointing earnings. Great expectations lead to great disappointment if they are not met. A failure to meet moderate expectations leads to a much milder reaction. Thus, one of the biggest risks in owning growth stocks is not that their growth will stop, but merely that it will slow down. And in the long run, that is not merely a risk, but a virtual certainty.
近期的历史和大量的金融研究已经表明，市场对突然报告收益下降的快速增长公司最为不利。像格雷厄姆时代的 Alcoa， 或者我们这个时代的安海斯布希和高露洁棕榈，这些适度且稳定的增长者，如果他们报告了令人失望的收益，股票下跌的幅度往往会较小。过高的期望如果没有得到满足，会导致巨大的失望；未能达到适度的期望，反应会轻微得多。因此，拥有成长股的最大风险不是它们的增长会停止，而只是它会放慢。从长远来看，这不仅仅是一种风险，而是一种几乎可以确定的事情。
One for more on how stock options can enrich corporate managers, but not necessarily outside shareholders. See the commentary on Chapter 19.
一关于股票期权如何能使公司经理人富裕，但不一定能使外部股东富裕的更多信息，请参见第19章的评论。
All the above examples are taken directly from press releases issued by the companies themselves. For a brilliant satire on what daily life would be like if we all got to justify our behavior the same way companies adjust their reported earnings, see My Pro Forma Life by Rob Walker at http://slate.msn.com/ID=2063953. A recent post-workout lunch of a 22-ounce bone-in rib steak at Smith & Walensky and 3 shots of bourbon is treated here as a non-recurring expense. I'll never do that again.
上述所有例子都直接取自公司自己发布的新闻稿。关于如果我们都能像公司调整他们报告的收益那样为我们的行为辩解， 日常生活会变得如何？可以参见 Rob Walker 的《我的形式生活》http://slate.amazon.com/ID:20639553中的精彩讽刺。我最近在 Smith 与 Wolanski 健身后的午餐吃了一份22盎司的带骨类眼牛排和3杯波本酒，在这里被视为一次性费用。我再也不会那样做了。
3. In 2002, Quest was one of 330 publicly traded companies to restate past financial statements, an all-time record, according to Huron Consulting Group. All information on Quest is taken from its financial filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission Annual Report, Form 8K, and Form 10K, found in the Edgar database at www.sec.gov. No hindsight was required to detect the change in accounting principle, which Quest fully disclosed at the time. How did Quest shares do over this period? At year-end 2000, the stock had been at $41 per share, a total market value of $67.9 billion. By early 2003, Quest was around $4, valuing the entire company at less than $7 billion, a 90% loss. The drop in share price is not the only cost associated with bogus earnings. A recent study found that a sample of 27 firms accused of accounting fraud by the SEC had overpaid $320 million in federal income tax. Although much of that money will eventually be refunded by the IRS, most shareholders are unlikely to stick around to benefit from the refunds. See Merle Erickson, Michelle Hanlon, and Edward Maydew. How much will firms pay for earnings that do not exist? At http://papers.ssrn.com.
2002年 Quest 是根据 Huron 咨询集团的记录，330家公开交易公司中的一家，这些公司都重新声明了过去的财务报表，创下了历史新高。所有关于 Quest 的信息都来自其与美国证券交易委员会年度报告表格 8K 和表格 10K 的财务报告，可以在 3w.sec.gov 的 Edgar 数据库中找到。在当时，无需借助后见之明就可以发现会计原则的变更 ，Quest 在当时就已经完全披露了。Quest 在这段时间内的股票表现如何？在2000年年底，股票价格为每股41美元，总市值为679亿美元。到2003年初 ，Quest 的价格大约为4美元，整个公司的估值不到70亿美元，损失了90%。股价的下跌并不是虚假收益唯一的成本。一项最近的研究发现，美国证券交易委员会指控的27家涉嫌会计欺诈的公司，多支付了3.2亿美元的联邦所得税。尽管大部分钱最终会由 IRS 退还，但大多数股东可能不会等到退款的好处。参见 Merle Erickson, Michelle Hanlon, and Edward Maydew 的 How much will firms pay for earnings that do not exist? 网址为 http://papers.ssrn.com.
For Global Crossing formerly treated much of its construction costs as an expense to be charged against the revenue generated from the sale or lease of usage rights on its network. Customers generally paid for their rights up front, although some could pay in installments over periods of up to 4 years. But Global Crossing did not book most of the revenues up front, instead deferring them over the lifetime of the lease. Now, however, because the networks had an estimated usable life of up to 25 years, Global Crossing began treating them as depreciable, long-lived capital assets. While this treatment conforms with generally accepted accounting principles, it is unclear why Global Crossing did not use it before October 1, 1999, or what exactly prompted the change. As of March 2001, Global Crossing had a total stock valuation of $12.6 billion. The company filed for bankruptcy on January 28, 2002. Rendering its common stock essentially worthless.
4. Global Crossing 以前将其大部分建设成本视为费用，用于抵消其网络使用权的销售或租赁收入。客户通常会提前支付他们的权利，尽管有些人可以在最多4年的时间内分期付款。但是 Global Crossing 并没有立即计入大部分收入，而是在租赁期内逐步确认。然而，现在由于网络的预计使用寿命长达25年， Global Crossing 开始将其视为可折旧的、使用寿命长的资本资产。虽然这种处理方式符合公认的会计原则，但不清楚为什么 Global Crossing 在1999年10月1日之前没有使用它，或者是什么促使了这种变化。截至2001年3月， Global Crossing 的总股票估值为126亿美元， 该公司于2002年1月28日申请破产，使其普通股基本上变得一文不值。
5. I am grateful to Howard Schillett and Mark Hamill of the Center for Financial Research and Analysis for providing this example.
5. 我感谢财务研究和分析中心的 Howard Schillett 和 Mark Hamill 提供了这个例子。
6. Returns are approximated by dividing the total net value of plan assets at the beginning of the year by actual return on plan assets.
6. 通过将年初计划资产的总净值除以计划资产的实际回报来近似计算回报。
7. Do not be put off by the stupefyingly boring verbiage of accounting footnotes. They are designed expressly to deter normal people from actually reading them, which is why you must persevere. A footnote to the 1996 annual report of Informix Corporation, for instance, disclosed that the company generally recognizes license revenue from sales of software licenses upon delivery of the software product to a customer. However, for certain computer hardware manufacturers and end-user licensees with amounts payable within 12 months, the company will recognize revenue at the time the customer makes a contractual commitment for a minimum non-refundable license fee. If such computer hardware manufacturers and end-user licensees meet certain criteria established by the company. In plain English, Informix was saying that it would credit itself for revenues on products even if they had not yet been resold to end users, the actual customers for Informix's software. Amid allegations by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission that Informix had committed accounting fraud, the company later restated its revenues, wiping away $244 million in such sales. This case is a keen reminder of the importance of reading the fine print with a skeptical eye. I am indebted to Martin Friedson for suggesting this example.
7. 不要被会计附注中令人昏昏欲睡的措辞所吓倒。他们的设计目的就是阻止普通人真正阅读它们，这就是为什么你必须坚持下去。例如 Informix Corp. 1996年的年度报告中的一个角注披露，公司通常在向客户交付软件产品时确认来自软件许可销售的许可收入。然而，对于某些计算机硬件制造商和在12个月内应付款项的最终用户许可证持有人，如果这些计算机硬件制造商和最终用户许可证持有人满足公司设定的某些标准，公司将在客户做出最低不可退款许可费用的合同承诺时确认收入。用简单的英语来说 ，Informix 表示，即使产品尚未被转售给最终用户 Informix 软件的实际客户，它也会为产品的收入记账。在美国证券交易委员会指控 Informix 进行了会计欺诈的指控中，该公司后来重新声明了其收入，消除了这样的销售中的 2.44 亿美元。这个案例深刻地提醒我们以怀疑的眼光阅读细则的重要性。我要感谢 Martin Friedson 提供了这个例子。
8. Martin Friedson and Fernando Alvarez, Financial Statement Analysis, A Practitioner's Guide, John Wiley & Sons, New York, 2002, Charles W. Mulford and Eugene E. Comiskey, The Financial Numbers Game. Detecting Creative Accounting Practices, John Wiley & Sons, New York, 2002, Howard Schillett, Financial Shenanigans, McGraw-Hill, New York, 2002. Benjamin Graham's own book, The Interpretation of Financial Statements, Harper Business, New York, 1998 reprint of 1937 edition, remains an excellent brief introduction to the basic principles of earnings and expenses, assets and liabilities.
8. Martin Friedson 和 Fernando Alvarez 财务报表分析实践者指南 John Wiley 与 Sons 纽约2002 Charles W. Mulford 和 Eugene E. Comiskey 财务数字游戏检测创新会计实践 John Wiley 与 Sons 纽约2002 Howard Schillett 财务骗局 McGraw-Hill 纽约2002 Benjamin Graham 自己的书财务报表的解读 Harper Business 纽约1998年重印1937年版，仍然是对收入和费用、资产和负债基本原则的优秀简介。
Asterisk of Graham's for examples. Only Emerson Electric still exists in the same form. ELTRA Corporation is no longer an independent company. It merged with Bunker Ramo Corporation in the 1970s, putting it in the business of supplying stock quotes to brokerage firms across an early network of computers. What remains of ELTRA's operations is now part of Honeywell Corporation. The firm formerly known as Emory Air Freight is now a division of CNF Incorporated. Imhart Corporation was acquired by Black & Decker Corporation in 1989.
星号在 Graham 的4个例子中，只有 Emerson Electric 仍然以相同的形式存在。Altair Corp 不再是一家独立公司，它在20世纪70年代与 Bunker Ramo Corp 合并，进入了通过早期计算机网络向全国经纪公司提供股票报价的业务。Altair 的运营部分现在是 Honeywell Corp 的一部分。曾经被称为 Emery Air Freight 的公司，现在是 CNF Inc. 的一个部门。Emhart Corp 在1989年被 Black 与 Decker Corp 收购。
Asterisk this measure is captured in the line net per share / book value in Table 13.2, which measures the company's net income as a percentage of their tangible book value.
星号这个度量在表13-2的净每股账面价值一行中被捕获，该行度量了公司的净收入占其有形账面价值的百分比。
Asterisk in each case, Graham is referring to Section C of Table 13.2 and dividing the high price during the 1936 to 1968 period by the low price. For example, Emery's high price of 66 divided by its low price of 1/8 equals 528, or a ratio of 528 to 1 between the high and low.
星号在每个案例中 ，Graham 都是参考表13-2的 C 部分，并将1936至1968期间的最高价格除以最低价格。例如 ，Emery 的最高价格为66，最低价格为1%，等于528，或者说最高和最低之间的比率为528:1。
Asterisk at the end of 1970, Emerson's $1.6 billion in market value truly was enormous, given average stock sizes at the time. At year-end 2002, Emerson's common stock had a total market value of approximately $21 billion.
星号到1970年底 ，Emerson 的16亿美元市值确实是巨大的，考虑到当时的平均股票规模。到2002年底 ，Emerson 的普通股总市值约为210亿美元。
Asterisk Graham was right. Of the Nifty 50 stocks that were most fashionable and highly valued in 1972, Emery fared among the worst. The March 1, 1982 issue of Forbes reported that since 1972 Emery had lost 72.8% of its value after inflation. By late 1974, according to the investment researchers at the Luthold Group in Minneapolis, Emery's stock had already fallen 58%, and its price/earnings ratio had plummeted from 64 times to just 15. The overenthusiasm Graham had warned against was eviscerated in short order. Can the passage of time make up for this kind of excess? Not always. Luthold calculated that $1,000 invested in Emery in 1972 would be worth only $839 as of 1999. It's likely that the people who overpaid for internet stocks in the late 1990s will not break even for decades. If ever, see the commentary on Chapter 20.
星号 Graham 是对的。在1972年最时髦、估值最高的 Nifty 50股票中 ，Emery 的表现是最差的。1982年3月1日的福布斯报道，自1972年以来 ，Emery 在通胀后失去了其价值的72.8%。据明尼阿波利斯的 Luthold Group 的投资研究人员称，到1974年底 ，Emery 的股票已经下跌了58%，其市盈率从64倍跌至仅15倍。Graham 警告过的过度热情在短时间内就被削弱了。时间的流逝能否弥补这种过渡？并非总是如此。Luthold 计算出，1972年投资在 Emery 的1000美元到1999年只值839美元。那些在20世纪90年代末为互联网股票支付过高价格的人，可能需要几十年时间才能收回本金。如果他们能收回的话，参见第20章的评论。
Asterisk Graham's point is that, based on their prices at the time, an investor could buy shares in these two companies for little more than their book value, as shown in the third line of Section B in Table 13.2.
星号 Graham 的观点是，基于当时的价格，投资者可以以略高于账面价值的价格购买这两家公司的股票，如表13-2的 B 部分的第3行所示。
One, as we will see in Chapter 19, this rationale often means, in practice, to provide funds for the continued growth of the company's top manager's wealth.
一正如我们将在第19章中看到的，这个理由在实践中通常意味着为公司高层管理者财富的持续增长提供资金。
Two, appearing on CNBC on December 30, 1999, EMC's chief executive, Michael Ruettgers, was asked by host Ron Insana whether 2000 and beyond would be as good as the 1990s had been. It actually looks like it's accelerating, boasted Ruetkers. When Insana asked if EMC stock was overvalued, Ruetkers answered, "I think when you look at the opportunity we have in front of us, it's almost unlimited." So while it's hard to predict whether these things are overpriced, there's such a major change taking place that if you could find the winners today, and I certainly think EMC is one of those people, you'll be well rewarded in the future.
1999年12月30日 ，EMC 的首席执行官迈克尔·鲁特格斯在 CNBC 上出现时，主持人罗恩·因萨纳问他2000年及以后是否会像1990年代那样好。鲁特格斯自豪地说：“实际上看起来它正在加速。”当因萨纳问 EMC 的股票是否被高估时，鲁特格斯回答：“我认为，当你看到我们面前的机会时，它几乎是无限的。所以虽然很难预测这些东西是否被高估，但正在发生的重大变化是，如果你今天能找到赢家，我当然认为 EMC 是其中之一，你将在未来得到丰厚的回报。”
3. The Y2K bug, or the year 2000 problem, was the belief that millions of computers worldwide would stop functioning at 1 second past midnight on the morning of January 1, 2000. Because programmers in the 1960s and 1970s had not thought to allow for the possibility of any date past December 31, 1999 in their operating code. U.S. companies spent billions of dollars in 1999 to ensure that their computers would be Y2K compliant. In the end, at 12 o'clock and 1 second a.m. on January 1, 2000, everything worked just fine.
3000年虫或2000年问题是一种观念，认为全球数百万台计算机会在2000年1月1日凌晨0点1秒后停止运行，因为1960年代和1970年代的程序员在他们的操作代码中没有考虑到任何超过1999年12月31日的日期的可能性。1999年，美国公司花费了数十亿美元以确保他们的计算机能应对千年虫。最后，在2000年1月1日凌晨12点0分01秒，一切都运行得很好。
For more on the folly of stock splits, see Jason Zweig, Splitsville, Money, March 2001, pages 55 to 56.
4. 关于股票拆分的愚蠢之处，更多信息请参见杰森·兹韦格 Splitsville, Money, 2001年3月，第55-56页。
5. Posting number 3622, December 7, 1999, at the Exodus Communications message board on the Raging Bull website, http://ragingbull.lycos.com, board/boards.cgi. Board equals EXDS and read equals 3622.
1999年12月7日，在 Raging Bull 网站上的 Exodus Communications 留言板上发布的第362号帖子 http://lycos.com/board/boards.cgi board 等于 EXDS 与 read 等于3622。
6. Posting number 3910, December 15, 1999, at the Exodus Communications message board on the Raging Bull website, http://ragingbull.lycos.com, board/boards.cgi. Board equals EXDS and read equals 3910.
1999年12月15日，在 Raging Bull 网站上的 Exodus Communications 留言板上发布的第3910号帖子 http://ragingbull.lycos.com/board/boards.cgi board 等于 EXDS 与 read 等于3910。
7. Seagram's speech, The New Speculation in Common Stocks, in the appendix, page 563.
7. 参见格雷厄姆的演讲 The New Speculation in Common Stocks 附录第563页。
Graham describes his recommended investment policies in chapters 4 through 7.
星号格雷厄姆在第4章至第7章中描述了他推荐的投资政策。
As we have discussed in the commentaries on chapters 5 and 9, today's defensive investor can achieve this goal simply by buying a low-cost index fund, ideally one that tracks the return of the total U.S. stock market.
正如我们在第5章和第9章的评论中讨论的，今天的防御性投资者只需购买一只低成本的指数基金，理想情况下是跟踪美国股市总回报的基金，就可以实现这个目标。
In early 2003, the yield on 10-year, AA-rated corporate bonds was around 4.6%, suggesting, by Graham's formula, that a stock portfolio should have an earnings-to-price ratio at least that high. Taking the inverse of that number, by dividing 4.6 into 100, we can derive a suggested maximum P/E ratio of 21.7. At the beginning of this paragraph, Graham recommends that the average stock be priced about 20% below the maximum ratio. That suggests that, in general, Graham would consider stocks selling at no more than 17 times their 3-year average earnings to be potentially attractive given today's interest rates and market conditions. As of December 31, 2002, more than 200, or better than 40%, of the stocks in the S&P 500 stock index had 3-year average P/E ratios of 17.0 or lower. Updated AA bond yields can be found at www.bondtout.com.
星号2003年初，10年期 AA 级公司债券的收益率约为 4.6%。根据格雷厄姆的公式，这表明股票投资组合应该有至少这么高的收益价格比率。将这个数字取倒数，将 4.6 除以100，我们可以得出一个建议的最大市盈率为 21.7。在这段话的开头，格雷厄姆建议平均股票的价格应该比最大比率低大约 20%。这表明，一般来说，格雷厄姆会认为今天的利率和市场条件下，以不超过其3年平均收益的17倍出售的股票可能具有吸引力。截至2002年12月31日 ，S&P 500股票指数中有超过200只股票，占比超过40%号，得3年平均市盈率为 17.0 或更低。更新的 AA 级债券收益率可以在 3w.bondtout.com 上找到。
Asterisk an easy-to-use online stock screener that can sort the stocks in the S&P 500 by most of Graham's criteria is available at www.quicken.com investments/stocks/search/full.
星号一个易于使用的在线股票筛选器，可以按照格雷厄姆的大部分标准对 S&P 500中的股票进行排序，可以在以下网址找到：3w.quicken.com/investments/search/full.
When Graham wrote, only one major mutual fund specializing in utility stocks, Franklin Utilities, was widely available. Today there are more than 30. Graham could not have anticipated the financial havoc wrought by canceled and decommissioned nuclear energy plants, nor did he foresee the consequences of bungled regulation in California. Utility stocks are vastly more volatile than they were in Graham's day, and most investors should own them only through a well-diversified, low-cost fund like the Dow Jones U.S. Utilities Sector Index Fund, ticker symbol, IDU, or Utilities Select Sector SPDR, XAU. For more information, see www.ishares.com and www.spdrindex.com/spdr/. Be sure your broker will not charge commissions to reinvest your dividends.
当格雷厄姆写作时，只有一个主要的专门投资于公用事业股票的共同基金——富兰克林公用事业基金被广泛接受。如今，这样的基金已经超过30个。格雷厄姆无法预见到被取消和退役的核能电厂所带来的金融混乱，他也没有预见到在加利福尼亚的监管失误的后果。公用事业股票的波动性比格雷厄姆时代大得多，大多数投资者只应通过像道琼斯美国公用事业部门指数基金股票代码 IDU 或公用事业精选部门 SPDR XLU 这样的多元化低成本基金来持有它们。更多信息请参见 3w.ishares.com 和 3w.spiderindex.com/spider-。确保你的经纪人在投资你的股息时不会收取佣金。
Asterisk in a remarkable confirmation of Graham's point. The dull-sounding Standard & Poor's Utility Index outperformed the vaunted NASDAQ Composite Index for the 30 years ending December 31, 2002.
星号格雷厄姆的观点得到了显著的证实。那个听起来乏味的标准普尔公用事业指数，在截至2002年12月31日的30年里，表现优于备受瞩目的纳斯达克综合指数。
Asterisk today the financial services industry is made up of even more components, including commercial banks, savings and loan and mortgage financing companies, consumer finance firms like credit card issuers, money managers, and trust companies, investment banks and brokerages, insurance companies, and firms engaged in developing or owning real estate, including real estate investment trusts. Although the sector is much more diversified today, Graham's caveats about financial soundness apply more than ever.
星号如今，金融服务行业由更多的组成部分构成，包括商业银行、储蓄和贷款以及抵押贷款融资公司，像信用卡发行者这样的消费金融公司， 资金管理和信托公司、投资银行和经纪公司、保险公司，以及从事开发或拥有房地产的公司，包括房地产投资信托。尽管如今的这个行业更加多元化，但格雷厄姆对于财务稳健的警告比以往任何时候都更加适用。
Only a few major rail stocks now remain, including Burlington Northern, CSX, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific. The advice in this section is at least as relevant to airline stocks today, with their massive current losses and a half-century of almost incessantly poor results, as it was to railroads in Graham's day.
星号现在只剩下几个主要的铁路股票，包括柏林顿北方、CSX、诺福克南方和联合太平洋。这一部分的建议对于现在的航空股票至少同样适用，它们现在的亏损巨大，而且在过去的半个世纪里几乎一直表现糟糕，就像在格雷厄姆的时代对铁路股票一样。
Graham is summarizing the efficient markets hypothesis, or EMH, an academic theory claiming that the price of each stock incorporates all publicly available information about the company. With millions of investors scouring the market every day, it is unlikely that severe mispricings can persist for long. An old joke has two finance professors walking along the sidewalk. When one spots a $20 bill and bends over to pick it up, the other grabs his arm and says, "Don't bother." If it was really a $20 bill, someone would have taken it already. While the market is not perfectly efficient, it is pretty close most of the time, so the intelligent investor will stoop to pick up the stock market's $20 bills only after researching them thoroughly and minimizing the cost of trading and taxes.
星号格雷厄姆在总结有效市场假说或 IM， 这是一个学术理论。他声称每只股票的价格都包含了关于该公司的所有公开可用信息。每天有数百万的投资者在市场上搜寻，严重的定价错误不太可能长时间存在。有一个老笑话说，两个金融教授在人行道上走着，当其中一个看到一张$20的钞票并弯腰去捡时，另一个抓住他的手臂说：“别费劲了。”如果真的是一张$20的钞票，早就有人捡走了。虽然市场并不完全有效，但大多数时候它都相当接近，所以聪明的投资者只有在彻底研究并最小化交易和税收成本后，才会弯腰捡起股市的$20钞票。
This is one of the central points of Graham's book. All investors labor under a cruel irony. We invest in the present, but we invest for the future. And, unfortunately, the future is almost entirely uncertain. Inflation and interest rates are undependable. Economic recessions come and go at random. Geopolitical upheavals like war, commodity shortages, and terrorism arrive without warning. And the fate of individual companies and their industries often turns out to be the opposite of what most investors expect. Therefore, investing on the basis of projection is a fool's errand. Even the forecasts of the so-called experts are less reliable than the flip of a coin. For most people, investing on the basis of protection from overpaying for a stock and from overconfidence in the quality of their own judgment is the best solution. Graham expands on this concept in Chapter 20.
星号，这是格雷厄姆书中的一个核心观点。所有投资者都在一个残酷的讽刺下劳动。我们在现在投资，但我们为未来投资。不幸的是，未来几乎完全是不确定的。通货膨胀和利率是不可靠的，经济衰退随机来去，地缘政治的动荡，如战争、商品短缺和恐怖主义，都是毫无预警的。而个别公司和他们所在行业的命运，往往与大多数投资者的预期相反。因此，基于预测的投资是一种愚蠢的行为，即使是所谓的专家的预测，也不如抛硬币来的可靠。对于大多数人来说，基于保护的投资，避免过高的股票价格和对自己判断力的过度自信是最好的解决方案。格雷厄姆在第20章中对这个概念进行了扩展。
When adjusted for stock splits. To many people, MicroStrategy really did look like the next Microsoft in early 2000. Its stock had gained 566.7% in 1999, and its chairman, Michael Saylor, declared that our future today is better than it was 18 months ago. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission later accused MicroStrategy of accounting fraud, and Saylor paid an $8.3 million fine to settle the charges.
一调整为股票拆分。对许多人来说 ，MicroStrategy 在2000年初确实看起来像是下一个微软。它的股票在1999年增长了566.7%， 其董事长迈克尔·瑟勒宣布，我们今天的未来比18个月前更好。美国证券交易委员会后来指控 MicroStrategy 进行了会计欺诈，瑟勒支付了830万美元的罚款以解决这些指控。
To John Berger, The 30 Best Stocks, Money, Fall 2002, pages 88 to 95.
2张 Berger 最佳30只股票，金钱杂志2002年秋季第88-95页。
One, by the time you read this, much will already have changed since year-end 2002.
一当你读到这里时，自2002年底以来已经发生了很多变化。
To David Dreeman, Bubbles and the Role of Analyst Forecasts, The Journal of Psychology and Financial Markets, Volume 3, Number 1, 2002, pages 4 to 14.
2 David Dreeman 泡沫和分析师预测的作用，心理学与金融市场杂志第3卷第1期2002第4-14页。
3. You can calculate this ratio by hand from a company's annual reports or obtain the data at websites like www.morningstar.com or http://finance.yahoo.com.
3. 你可以通过手动计算公司的年度报告来得到这个比率，或者在向 3w.morningstar.com 或 http://finance.yahoo.com 这样的网站上获取数据。
For more on what to look for, see the commentary on chapters 11, 12, and 19. If you are not willing to go to the minimal effort of reading the proxy and making basic comparisons of financial health across 5 years' worth of annual reports, then you are too defensive to be buying individual stocks at all. Get yourself out of the stock-picking business and into an index fund, where you belong.
4. 想要了解更多的话，可以参考第11章、12章和19章的评论。如果你不愿意花最少的努力去阅读代理报告，并对5年的年度报告进行基本的财务健康比较，那么你对购买个股过于保守。你应该退出挑选股票的行列，转而投资指数基金，这才是你应该做的。
The Friend-Bloom Crockett research covered January 1960 through June 1968 and compared the performance of more than 100 major mutual funds against the returns on portfolios constructed randomly from more than 500 of the largest stocks listed on the NYSE. The funds in the Friend-Bloom Crockett study did better from 1965 to 1968 than they had in the first half of the measurement period, much as Graham found in his own research. See above. Pages 158 and 229 to 232. But that improvement did not last. And the thrust of these studies, that mutual funds, on average, underperformed the market by a margin roughly equal to their operating expenses and trading costs, has been reconfirmed so many times that anyone who doubts them should found a financial chapter of the Flat Earth Society.
星号 Friend-Bloom Crockett 的研究覆盖了1960年1月至1968年6月，并比较了100多个主要共同基金与随机构建的500多个最大股票组成的投资组合在纽约证券交易所上市的回报。在1965年到1968年 Friend-Bloom Crockett 研究中的基金比测量期的前半段表现得更好，正如格雷厄姆在他自己的研究中发现的那样，参见上文第158页和第229-232页。但这种改善并没有持续下去。这些研究的主要观点即平均来看，共同基金的表现低于市场，差距大致等于他们的运营费用和交易成本，已经被多次重新确认，以至于任何怀疑他们的人都应该成立一个平地学会的金融章节。
As we discuss in the commentary on Chapter 9, there are several other reasons mutual funds have not been able to outperform the market averages, including the low returns on the fund's cash balances and the high cost of researching and trading stocks. Also, a fund holding 120 companies, a typical number, can trail the S&P 500 stock index if any of the other 380 companies in that benchmark turns out to be a great performer. The fewer stocks a fund owns, the more likely it is to miss the next Microsoft.
星号正如我们在第9章的评论中讨论的，共同基金未能超越市场平均水平，还有几个其他原因，包括基金现金余额的低回报和研究和交易股票的高成本。此外，如果一个基金持有120家公司，这是一个典型的数字，那么如果该基准中的其他380家公司中的任何一家变成了优秀的表现者，该基金就可能落后于标准普尔500股票指数。一个基金拥有的股票越少， 他就越可能错过下一个微软。
Asterisk in this section, as he did also on pages 363 to 364, Graham is summarizing the efficient market hypothesis. Recent appearances to the contrary, the problem with the stock market today is not that so many financial analysts are idiots, but rather that so many of them are so smart. As more and more smart people search the market for bargains, that very act of searching makes those bargains rarer and, in a cruel paradox, makes the analysts look as if they lack the intelligence to justify the search. The market's valuation of a given stock is the result of a vast, continuous, real-time operation of collective intelligence. Most of the time, for most stocks, that collective intelligence gets the valuation approximately right. Only rarely does Graham's Mr. Market, see Chapter 8, send prices wildly out of whack.
星号在这一部分，格雷厄姆也在第363-364页总结了有效市场假说。尽管最近的情况恰恰相反，但今天股市的问题并不在于有太多的金融分析师是笨蛋，而在于有太多的金融分析师非常聪明。随着越来越多的聪明人在市场上寻找便宜货，寻找的行为本身就使得这些便宜货变得更加稀少，并且这种残酷的悖论使得分析师们看起来好像他们缺乏进行搜索的智慧。市场对给定股票的估值是一个庞大的、连续的、实时的集体智慧的操作结果。大多数时候，对于大多数股票，这种集体智慧能够大致正确地得出估值。只有很少的时候，格雷厄姆的市场先生参见第8章会使价格大幅度地偏离正常。
Graham launched Graham Newman Corporation in January 1936 and dissolved it when he retired from active money management in 1956. It was the successor to a partnership called the Benjamin Graham Joint Account, which he ran from January 1926 through December 1935.
格雷厄姆于1936年1月创立了格雷厄姆纽曼公司，并在1956年从积极的资金管理中退休时解散了它。它是他从1926年1月到1935年12月经营的一个名为本杰明·格雷厄姆联合账户的合伙企业的继任者。
Asterisk and unrelated, hedge involves buying a stock or bond issued by one company and short selling, or betting on a decline in, a security issued by a different company. A related, hedge involves buying and selling different stocks or bonds issued by the same company. The new group of hedge funds described by Graham were widely available around 1968, but later regulation by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission restricted access to hedge funds for the general public.
星号无关对冲涉及购买一家公司发行的股票或债券，并做空或压住下跌另一家公司发行的证券。相关对冲涉及购买和出售同一家公司发行的不同股票或债券。格雷厄姆描述的新群体对冲基金在1968年左右广泛可用，但后来美国证券交易委员会的监管限制了公众对对冲基金的访问。
Asterisk in 2003, an intelligent investor following Graham's train of thought would be searching for opportunities in the technology, telecommunications, and electric utility industries. History has shown that yesterday's losers are often tomorrow's winners.
星号在2003年遵循格雷厄姆的思路的聪明投资者会在技术、电信和电力公用事业行业中寻找机会。历史已经证明，昨天的失败者往往是明天的赢家。
Asterisk, the successor corporation to Industrial National Bank of Rhode Island is Fleet Boston Financial Corporation. One of its corporate ancestors, the Providence Bank, was founded in 1791.
星号罗德岛工业国家银行的继任公司是 Fleet Boston Financial Corp. 它的一个公司祖先普罗维登斯银行成立于1791年。
Asterisk, for today's investor, the cutoff is more likely to be around $1 per share, the level below which many stocks are delisted or declared ineligible for trading on major exchanges. Just monitoring the stock prices of these companies can take a considerable amount of effort, making them impractical for defensive investors. The costs of trading low-priced stocks can be very high. Finally, companies with very low stock prices have a distressing tendency to go out of business. However, a diversified portfolio of dozens of these distressed companies may still appeal to some enterprising investors today.
星号对于今天的投资者来说，界限更可能在每股$1左右，许多股票的价格低于这个水平就会被摘牌，或被宣布不适合在主要交易所交易。 仅仅监控这些公司的股票价格就需要花费大量的努力，这使得他们对防守型投资者来说不切实际。交易低价股的成本可能非常高。最后，股票价格非常低的公司往往有破产的倾向。然而，由这些陷入困境的公司组成的多元化投资组合可能仍然吸引一些今天的进取型投资者。
Asterisk in Graham's terms, a large amount of goodwill can result from two causes. A corporation can acquire other companies for substantially more than the value of their assets, or its own stock can trade for substantially more than its book value.
星号在格雷厄姆的理论中，大量的商誉可能由两个原因产生：一是公司以远超其资产价值的价格收购其他公司；二是公司自身的股票交易价格远超其账面价值。
Asterisk technically, the working capital value of a stock is the current assets per share, minus the current liabilities per share, divided by the number of shares outstanding. Here, however, Graham means net working capital value, or the per share value of current assets minus total liabilities.
星号从技术上讲，股票的营运资本价值是每股当前资产减去每股当前负债，再除以流通在外的股票数量。然而，在这里，格雷厄姆指的是净营运资本价值，即当前资产的每股价值减去总负债。
Asterisk le cœur ses raisons que la raison n'est qu'un point. This poetic passage is one of the concluding arguments in the great French theologian's discussion of what has come to be known as Pascal's wager. See commentary on Chapter 20.
星号 le cœur ses raisons que la raison n'est qu'un point. 这段诗意的文字是这位伟大的法国神学家在讨论被称为帕斯卡尔的赌注的论点时的结论之一，参见第20章的评论。
Asterisk as discussed in the commentary on Chapter 7, merger arbitrage is wholly inappropriate for most individual investors.
星号正如在第7章的评论中讨论的，对于大多数个人投资者来说，合并套利是完全不合适的。
One Patricia Dreyfus, Investment Analysis and Two Easy Lessons interview with Graham, Money, July, 1976, page 36.
一 Patricia Dreyfus 投资分析的2个简单课程与格雷厄姆的访谈 Money 1976年7月第36页。
To see the commentary on Chapter 11.
2参见第11章的评论。
3. There are also many newsletters dedicated to analyzing professional portfolios, but most of them are a waste of time and money for even the most enterprising investor. A shining exception for people who can spare the cash is Outstanding Investor Digest, www.oid.com.
3也有许多专门分析专业投资组合的新闻简报，但对于即使是最有进取心的投资者来说，大多数都是浪费时间和金钱。对于那些有闲钱的人来说，一个闪亮的例外是杰出投资者文摘 3w.b.com。
One is a brief example of how convertible bonds work in practice. Consider the 4.75% convertible subordinated notes issued by DoubleClick Incorporated in 1999. They pay $47.50 in interest per year and are each convertible into 24.24 shares of the company's common stock, a conversion ratio of 24.24. As of year-end 2002, DoubleClick stock was priced at $5.66 a share, giving each bond a conversion value of $137.20. $5.66, 24.24. Yet the bonds traded roughly 6 times higher, at $881.30, creating a conversion premium, or excess over their conversion value, of 542%. If you bought at that price, your break-even time, or payback period, was very long. You paid roughly $750 more than the conversion value of the bond, so it will take nearly 16 years of $47.50 interest payments for you to earn back that conversion premium. Since each DoubleClick bond is convertible to just over 24 common shares, the stock will have to rise from $5.66 to more than $36 if conversion is to become a practical option before the bonds mature in 2006. Such a stock return is not impossible, but it borders on the miraculous. The cash yield on this particular bond scarcely seems adequate, given the low probability of conversion.
以 DoubleClick Inc. 在1999年发行的 4.75% 可转换次级票据为例，说明实践中可转换债券的运作方式。 他们每年支付47.50美元的利息，并且每张都可以转换为24.24股公司的普通股，这是一个转换比率为24.24%。截至2002年年底 ，DoubleClick 的股票价格为每股5.66美元，使每张债券的转换价值为137.20美元，5.66美元乘以24.24。然而，这些债券的交易价格大约是这个价值的6倍，为881.30美元，这创造了一个转换溢价，或者说是超过其转换价值的542%。如果你以这个价格购买，你的收支平衡时间或回收期将会非常长。你支付的价格大约比债券的转换价值多750美元，所以你需要近16年的47.50美元的利息支付才能赚回那个转换溢价。由于每张 DoubleClick 的债券可以转换为刚好超过24股的普通股，所以股票价格必须从5.66美元涨到超过36美元，转换才有可能在2006年债券到期前成为一个实际的选择。这样的股票回报并非不可能，但它几乎是奇迹。考虑到转换的可能性很低，这种特定债券的现金收益似乎并不充足。
Too, like many of the track records commonly cited on Wall Street, this one is hypothetical. It indicates the return you would have earned in an imaginary index fund that owned all major convertibles. It does not include any management fees or trading costs, which are substantial for convertible securities. In the real world, your returns would have been roughly 2 percentage points lower.
像华尔街常常引用的许多业绩记录一样，这个也是假设的。他表示，你在一个拥有所有主要可转换证券的虚构指数基金中可能获得的回报。它并未包括任何管理费用或交易成本。对于可转换证券来说，这些费用是相当大的。在现实世界中，你的回报大约会低2个百分点。
3. However, most convertible bonds remain junior to other long-term debt and bank loans. So, in a bankruptcy, convertible holders do not have prior claim to the company's assets. And while they are not nearly as dicey as high-yield junk bonds, many converts are still issued by companies with less than sterling credit ratings. Finally, a large portion of the convertible market is held by hedge funds, whose rapid-fire trading can increase the volatility of prices.
然而，大多数可转换债券仍然次于其他长期债务和银行贷款，所以在破产情况下，可转换债券持有者并没有优先权利索取公司的资产。而且，虽然它们并不像高收益的垃圾债券那样风险高，但许多可转换债券仍然是由信用评级不太好的公司发行的。最后，大部分的可转换债券市场是由对冲基金持有的，它们的快速交易可以增加价格的波动性。
For more detail, see www.fidelity.com, www.vanguard.com, and www.morningstar.com. The intelligent investor will never buy a convertible bond fund with annual operating expenses exceeding 1%.
有关更多详细信息，请参阅 3w.fidelity.com、3w.vanguard.com 和 3w.morningstar.com。聪明的投资者永远不会购买年度运营费用超过 1.0% 的可转换债券基金。
How shocked was the financial world by the Penn Central's bankruptcy, which was filed over the weekend of June 20th to 21st, 1970. The closing trade in Penn Central's stock on Friday, June 19th, was $11.25 per share, hardly a going-out-of-business price. In more recent times, stocks like Enron and WorldCom have also sold at relatively high prices shortly before filing for bankruptcy protection.
星号1970年6月20日至21日的周末，宾夕法尼亚中央铁路公司申请破产，金融界对此有多么震惊！6月19日，周五，宾夕法尼亚中央铁路公司的股票收盘价为每股11.25美元，这几乎不是一个即将破产的价格。在更近的时期，像安然和世通这样的股票，在申请破产保护前不久，也以相对较高的价格出售。
Penn Central was the product of the merger, announced in 1966, of the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad.
星号宾夕法尼亚中央铁路公司是宾夕法尼亚铁路公司和纽约中央铁路公司在1966年宣布合并的产物。
This kind of accounting legerdemain, in which profits are reported as if unusual or extraordinary or non-recurring charges do not matter, anticipates the reliance on pro forma financial statements that became popular in the late 1990s. See the commentary on Chapter 12.
这种会计手法即将利润报告为如果不寻常或特殊或非经常性费用不重要，预示着在1990年代末流行起来的依赖预计财务报表，参见第12章的评论。
Asterisk a railroad's transportation ratio, now more commonly called its operating ratio, measures the expenses of running its trains divided by the railroad's total revenues. The higher the ratio, the less efficient the railroad. Today, even a ratio of 70% would be considered excellent.
星号铁路的运输比率现在更常被称为其运营比率，衡量的是运行其列车的费用除以铁路的总收入。比率越高，铁路的效率越低。今天，即使是70%的比率，也会被认为是优秀的。
Today, Penn Central is a faded memory. In 1976, it was absorbed into Consolidated Rail Corporation, Conrail, a federally funded holding company that bailed out several failed railroads. Conrail sold shares to the public in 1987 and, in 1997, was taken over jointly by CSX Corporation and Norfolk Southern Corp.
今天，宾夕法尼亚中央铁路公司已经成为了一个淡淡的记忆。1976年，它被吸收进了联合铁路公司 Conrail， 这是一个由联邦资助的控股公司，它挽救了几家失败的铁路公司。1987年 ，Conrail 向公众出售了股票。1997年，它被 CSX 公司和诺福克南方公司共同接管。
Ling Timcovat Incorporated was founded in 1955 by James Joseph Ling, an electrical contractor who sold his first $1 million worth of shares to the public by becoming his own investment banker, hawking prospectuses from a booth set up at the Texas State Fair. His success at that led him to acquire dozens of different companies, almost always using LTV's stock to pay for them. The more companies LTV acquired, the higher its stock went. The higher its stock went, the more companies it could afford to acquire. By 1969, LTV was the 14th biggest firm on the Fortune 500 list of major U.S. corporations. And then, as Graham shows, the whole house of cards came crashing down. LTV Corporation, now exclusively a steelmaker, ended up seeking bankruptcy protection in late 2000. Companies that grow primarily through acquisitions are called serial acquirers, and the similarity to the term serial killers is no accident. As the case of LTV demonstrates, serial acquirers nearly always leave financial death and destruction in their wake. Investors who understood this lesson of Graham's would have avoided such darlings of the 1990s as Conseco, Tyco, and WorldCom.
林腾科沃特公司由詹姆斯·约瑟夫·林于1955年创立，他是一位电器承包商。他通过成为自己的投资银行家，在德克萨斯州博览会上设立摊位，向公众出售了他的第100万美元的股票。他在此方面的成功使他收购了几十家不同的公司，几乎总是使用 LTV 的股票来支付。LTV 收购的公司越多，其股票价格就越高，其股票价格越高，他就能负担得起更多的公司。到1969年 ，LTV 已经是财富500强美国大公司中的第14大公司。然后，正如格雷厄姆所展示的，整个房子的牌状结构崩溃了。现在只是一家钢铁制造商的 LTV 公司，在2000年底寻求破产保护，主要通过收购来增长的公司被称为连环收购者，和连环杀手这个词的相似性并非偶然。正如 LTV 的案例所示，连环收购者几乎总是在他们身后留下金融死亡和破坏。理解了格雷厄姆的这个教训的投资者就会避开1990年代的蠢儿，如 Conseco、Tyco 和 WorldCom。
Asterisk the sordid tradition of hiding a company's true earnings picture under the cloak of restructuring charges is still with us. Piling up every possible charge in one year is sometimes called big bath or kitchen sink accounting. This bookkeeping gimmick enables companies to make an easy show of apparent growth in the following year, but investors should not mistake that for real business health.
星号用重组费用的披风来掩盖公司真实的收益情况的肮脏传统仍然存在。在一年内堆积所有可能的费用，有时被称为大狱或厨房水槽会计。这种记账伎俩使公司能够在第二年轻易地展示出明显的增长，但投资者不应将其误认为是真正的商业健康。
The bond discount asset appears to mean that LTV had purchased some bonds below their par value, and was treating that discount as an asset on the grounds that the bonds could eventually be sold at par. Graham scoffs at this, since there is rarely any way to know what a bond's market price will be on a given date in the future. If the bonds could be sold only at values below par, this asset would in fact be a liability.
债券折扣资产似乎意味着 LTV 以低于面值的价格购买了一些债券，并将这种折扣视为资产，理由是这些债券最终可以以面值出售。格雷厄姆对此嗤之以鼻，因为很少有任何方式可以知道债券在未来某个日期的市场价格会是多少。如果债券只能以低于面值的价格出售，这个资产实际上就是一种负债。
We can only imagine what Graham would have thought of the investment banking firms that brought Infospace Incorporated public in December 1998. The stock, adjusted for later splits, opened for trading at $31.25, peaked at $1,305.32 per share in March 2000, and finished 2002 at a princely $8.45 per share.
我们只能想象格雷厄姆对那些在1998年12月将 Infospace 公司公开上市的投资银行公司会有什么看法。该股票经过后来的拆分调整，开盘价为每股 31.25 美元，2000年3月达到每股 1305.32 美元的峰值，并在2002年以每股 8.45 美元的高价收盘。
Graham would have been disappointed, though surely not surprised, to see that commercial banks have chronically kept supporting unsound expansions. Enron and WorldCom, two of the biggest collapses in corporate history, were aided and abetted by billions of dollars in bank loans.
幸好格雷厄姆肯定会对此感到失望，尽管他肯定不会感到惊讶，那就是商业银行一直在支持不健康的扩张。安然和世通这两家在企业历史上崩溃最大的公司都得到了银行数十亿美元的贷款的支持和纵容。
In June 1972, just after Graham finished this chapter, a federal judge found that NVF's chairman, Victor Posner, had improperly diverted the pension assets of Sharon Steel to assist affiliated companies in their takeovers of other corporations. In 1977, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission secured a permanent injunction against Posner, NVF, and Sharon Steel to prevent them from future violations of federal laws against securities fraud. The commission alleged that Posner and his family had improperly obtained $1.7 million in personal perks from NVF, and Sharon overstated Sharon's pre-tax earnings by $13.9 million, misrecorded inventory, and shifted income and expenses from one year to another. Sharon Steel, which Graham had singled out with his cold and skeptical eye, became known among Wall Street wags as Sharon Steel. Posner was later a central force in the wave of leverage buyouts and hostile takeovers that swept the United States in the 1980s, as he became a major customer for the junk bonds underwritten by Drexel Burnham Lambert.
幸好1972年6月，格雷厄姆刚完成这一章时，一位联邦法官发现 NVF 的董事长维克多·波斯纳不当地挪用了沙龙钢铁的养老金资产，以帮助关联公司接管其他公司。1977年，美国证券交易委员会对波斯纳、NVF 和沙龙钢铁获得了一项永久禁令，以防止他们未来违反联邦证券欺诈法。委员会指控波斯纳及其家族不当地从 NVF 和沙龙获得了170万美元的个人特权，夸大了沙龙的税前收益1390万美元，错误记录了库存，并将收入和费用从一年转移到另一年。沙龙钢铁被格雷厄姆冷酷和怀疑的眼光挑选出来，被华尔街的嘲笑者称为分享和偷窃。后来，波斯纳在20世纪80年代席卷美国的杠杆收购和敌意收购浪潮中成为了中心力量，他成为了由德雷克瑟尔·伯纳姆、兰伯特承销的垃圾债券的主要客户。
The large dilution factor would be triggered when NVF employees exercised their warrants to buy common stock. The company would then have to issue more shares, and its net earnings would be divided across a much greater number of shares outstanding.
幸好当 NVF 的员工行使他们的认股权购买普通股时，将触发大幅度稀释因素。公司将不得不发行更多的股票，其净收益将被分配到更多的流通股份中。
Jackie G. Williams founded AAA Enterprises in 1958. On its first day of trading, the stock soared 56% to close at $20.25. Williams later announced that AAA would come up with a new franchising concept every month. If people would step into a mobile home to get their income taxes done by Mr. Tax of America, just imagine what else they might do inside a trailer. But AAA ran out of time and money before Williams ran out of ideas. The history of AAA Enterprises is reminiscent of the saga of a later company with charismatic management and scanty assets. ZZZZ Best achieved a stock market value of roughly $200 million in the late 1980s. Even though its purported industrial vacuum cleaning business was little more than a telephone and a rented office run by a teenager named Barry Minkoff. ZZZZ Best went bust and Minkoff went to jail. Even as you read this, another similar company is being formed, and a new generation of investors will be taken for a ride. No one who has read Graham, however, should climb on board.
杰基 G. 威廉姆斯于1958年创立了 AAA 企业，在交易的第一天，股票飙升了56%，收盘价为20.25美元。威廉姆斯后来宣布 ，AAA 将每个月推出一个新的特许经营概念。如果人们愿意走进一个移动房屋，由美国税务先生为他们做收入税，那么他们可能会在拖车里做什么呢？但是在威廉姆斯的想法用完之前 ，AAA 就已经没有时间和金钱了。AAA 企业的历史让人想起了后来一家具有魅力的管理层和稀缺资产的公司的传奇。尽管 CCCC Best 声称的工业吸尘器业务只不过是一个由一个名叫巴里·明科的少年经营的电话和一个租来的办公室，但在20世纪80年代末，它在股市中的价值大约为2亿美元。CCCC Best 破产了，明科进了监狱。就在你读这篇文章的时候，另一家类似的公司正在成立，一代新的投资者将被欺骗。然而，任何读过格雷厄姆的人都不应该上船。
Asterisk and Abu Benidham, by the British Romantic poet Leigh Hunt, 1784 to 1859. A righteous Muslim sees an angel writing in a golden book the names of those who love the Lord. When the angel tells Abu that his name is not among them, Abu says, I pray thee, then, write me as one that loves his fellow men. The angel returns the next night to show Abu the book, in which now Benidham's name led all the rest.
星号在英国浪漫主义诗人里，亨特1784至1859的阿布本阿德姆中，一个正直的穆斯林看到一个天使在一本金色的书中写着那些爱主的人的名字。当天使告诉阿布他的名字不在其中时，阿布说：“我祈求你把我写成一个爱他的同胞的人。”天使第二天晚上回来向阿布展示这本书，其中现在本阿德姆的名字领先于所有其他人。
Asterisk by purchasing more common stock at a premium to its book value, the investing public increased the value of AAA's equity per share. But investors were only pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, since most of the rise in shareholders' equity came from the public's own willingness to overpay for the stock.
星号通过以高于账面价值的溢价购买更多的普通股，投资公众增加了 AAA 美股的股权价值。但投资者只是在用自己的靴带拉自己起来，因为股东权益的大部分增长来自公众愿意为股票支付过高的价格。
Graham's point is that investment banks are not entitled to take credit for the gains a hot stock may produce right after its initial public offering unless they are also willing to take the blame for the stock's performance in the longer term. Many internet IPOs rose 1,000% or more in 1999 and early 2000. Most of them lost more than 95% in the subsequent 3 years. How could these early gains earned by a few investors justify the massive destruction of wealth suffered by the millions who came later? Many IPOs were, in fact, deliberately underpriced to manufacture immediate gains that would attract more attention for the next offering.
格雷厄姆的观点是，投资银行没有资格为一只热门股票在首次公开发行后可能产生的收益负责，除非他们也愿意为股票在长期内的表现负责。许多互联网 IPO 在1999年和2000年初上涨了1000%或更多，其中大部分在接下来的3年里损失了超过95%。这些早期由少数投资者赚取的收益如何能够证明后来的数百万投资者所遭受的财富大量毁灭呢？事实上，许多 IPO 被故意定价过低，以制造即时收益，吸引下一次发行的更多关注。
Asterisk the first 4 sentences of Graham's paragraph could read as the official epitaph of the internet and telecommunications bubble that burst in early 2000. Just as the Surgeon General's warning on the side of a cigarette pack does not stop everyone from lighting up, no regulatory reform will ever prevent investors from overdosing on their own greed. Not even communism can outlaw market bubbles. The Chinese stock market shot up 101.7% in the first half of 1999, then crashed. Nor can investment banks ever be entirely cleansed of their own compulsion to sell any stock at any price the market will bear. The circle can only be broken one investor and one financial advisor at a time. Mastering Graham's principles, see especially chapters 1, 8, and 20, is the best way to start.
星号格雷厄姆这段话的前4句话可以被视为2000年初互联网和电信泡沫破裂的官方墓志铭。就像烟盒侧面的卫生部长警告并不能阻止所有人点燃烟草一样，没有任何监管改革能够阻止投资者过度贪婪。即使是共产主义也不能禁止市场泡沫。1999年上半年，中国股市上涨了 101.7%， 然后崩溃。投资银行也永远无法完全摆脱他们自己出售任何股票的冲动，只要市场能承受任何价格。这个循环只能一个投资者、一个金融顾问一次打破。掌握格雷厄姆的原则，特别是第1章、第8章和第20章，是开始的最好方式。
1. This document, like all the financial reports cited in this chapter, is readily available to the public through the Edgar database at www.sec.gov.
这份文件就像本章引用的所有财务报告一样，都可以通过在 3w.sec.gov 上的 Edgar 数据库公开获取。
To the demise of the Chromatis acquisition is discussed in the Financial Times, August 29, 2001, page 1, and September 1/September 2, 2001, page 23.
2. 关于 Chromatis 收购的消亡，可以参考《金融时报》2001年8月29日第1页，以及2001年9月1日、9月2日第 XXI 页的讨论。
3. When accounting for acquisitions, loading up on Wupperprat enabled Tyco to reduce the portion of the purchase price that it allocated to goodwill. Since Wupperprat can be expensed up front, while goodwill, under the accounting rules then in force, had to be written off over multi-year periods, this maneuver enabled Tyco to minimize the impact of goodwill charges on its future earnings.
3. 在进行收购会计时，大量使用 Wupperprat 使得泰科能够减少其分配给商誉的购买价格部分。由于 Wupperprat 可以在前期支出，而商誉根据当时的会计规则必须在多年期间内摊销，这种策略使得泰科能够最小化商誉费用对其未来收益的影响。
For in 2002, Tyco's former chief executive, L. Dennis Kozlowski, was charged by state and federal legal authorities with income tax fraud and improperly diverting Tyco's corporate assets for his own use, including the appropriation of $15,000 for an umbrella stand and $6,000 for a shower curtain. Kozlowski denied all charges.
2002年，泰科的前首席执行官 Dennis Kozlowski 被州和联邦法律机构以所得税欺诈和不当挪用泰科的公司资产供自己使用的罪名起诉，包括挪用15000美元购买雨伞架和6000美元购买浴帘。Kozlowski 否认了所有指控。
5. Disclosure. Jason Zweig is an employee of Time Incorporated, formerly a division of Time Warner and now a unit of AOL Time Warner Inc.
5. 披露 Jason Zweig 是时代公司的员工，该公司曾是时代华纳的一个部门，现在是美国在线时代华纳公司的一个单位。
1. eToys prospectus had a gatefold cover featuring an original cartoon of Arthur the Aardvark, showing in comic style how much easier it would be to buy tchotchkes for children at eToys than at a traditional toy store. As analyst Gail Bronson of IPO Monitor told the Associated Press on the day of eToys' stock offering, eToys has very smartly managed the development of the company last year and positioned themselves to be the children's center of the internet. Added Bronson, the key to a successful IPO, especially a .com IPO, is good marketing and branding. Bronson was partly right. That's the key to a successful IPO for the issuing company and its bankers. Unfortunately, for investors, the key to a successful IPO is earnings, which eToys didn't have.
eToys 的招股说明书封面上有一幅原创的亚瑟猪鼻龟的卡通画，以漫画的方式展示在 eToys 购买孩子的小玩意比在传统玩具店要容易得多。 如 IPO Monitor 的分析师 Gail Bronson 在 eToys 股票发行当天告诉美联社 ，eToys 在去年非常聪明地管理了公司的发展，并定位自己为互联网的儿童中心。Bronson 补充说，成功的 IPO， 尤其是点对点 IPO 的关键是良好的营销和品牌。Bronson 说的部分正确，这是发行公司和其银行家成功 IPO 的关键。不幸的是，对于投资者来说，成功的 IPO 的关键是收益，而 eToys 并没有。
Here Graham is describing real estate investment trust, which was acquired by San Francisco real estate investors in 1983 for $50 a share. The next paragraph describes Realty Equities Corporation of New York.
信号这里，格雷厄姆正在描述房地产投资信托，该信托在1983年被旧金山房地产投资者以每股$50的价格收购。下一段描述的是纽约的 Realty Equities Corp.
The actor Paul Newman was briefly a major shareholder in Realty Equities Corporation of New York after it bought his movie production company, Chaos Incorporated, in 1969.
演员保罗·纽曼曾经短暂地成为纽约房地产股份公司的主要股东，这是在该公司于1969年购买了他的电影制作公司 Chaos Inc. 之后的事。
Graham, an avid reader of poetry, is quoting Thomas Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard.
星号作为一位热衷于阅读诗歌的人，格雷厄姆正在引用托马斯·格雷的乡村教堂墓地的挽歌。
Realty Equities was delisted from the American Stock Exchange in September 1973. In 1974, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission sued Realty Equities accountants for fraud. Realty Equities founder, Morris Karp, later pleaded guilty to one count of grand larceny. In 1974 to 1975, the over-indebtedness that Graham criticizes led to a financial crisis among large banks, including Chase Manhattan, that had lent heavily to the most aggressive realty trusts.
星号房地产股份公司于1973年9月从美国股票交易所摘牌。1974年，美国证券交易委员会因欺诈行为起诉了房地产股份公司的会计师。房地产股份公司的创始人莫里斯·卡普后来对一项重大盗窃罪表示认罪。在1974至1975年，格雷厄姆所批评的过度债务导致了包括大通曼哈顿在内的大型银行之间的金融危机，这些银行曾大量借款给最具侵略性的房地产信托。
Heteroclite is a technical term from Classical Greek that Graham uses to mean abnormal or unusual.
异类是格雷厄姆从古典希腊语中引用的专业术语，意为异常或不寻常。
By volume, Graham is referring to sales or revenues, the total dollar amount of each company's business.
星号格雷厄姆所说的体积指的是销售或收入每家公司业务的总美元金额。
Asset backing and book value are synonyms. In Table 18.2, the relationship of price to asset or book value can be seen by dividing the first line, price, December 31st, 1969, by book value per share.
资产支持和账面价值是同义词。在表18-2中，可以通过将第一行1969年12月31日的价格除以每股账面价值来看出价格与资产或账面价值的关系。
Graham is citing his research on value stocks, which he discusses in Chapter 15, see page 389. Since Graham completed his studies, a vast body of scholarly work has confirmed that value stocks outperform growth stocks over long periods. Much of the best research in modern finance simply provides independent confirmation of what Graham demonstrated decades ago. See, for instance, James L. Davis, Eugene F. Fama, and Kenneth R. French, Characteristics, Covariances, and Average Returns, 1929 to 1997, at http://papers.ssrn.com.
格雷厄姆在引用他对价值股的研究，他在第15章见第389页中进行了讨论。自格雷厄姆完成他的研究以来，大量的学术研究已经证实，长期来看，价值股的表现优于成长股。现代金融中最好的研究往往只是独立地证实了格雷厄姆几十年前就已经证明的事实，例如可以参见詹姆斯 ·L. 戴维斯、尤金 ·F. 法马和肯尼斯·奥尔弗兰奇的特性、斜方差和平均回报。1929至1997，网址为 http://papers.ssrn.com。
Asterisk Air Products and Chemicals Incorporated still exists as a publicly traded stock and is included in the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index. Air Reduction Company became a wholly owned subsidiary of the BC Group, then known as British Oxygen, in 1978.
星号空气产品和化学品公司仍然存在，是一家公开交易的股票，被纳入标准普尔500股票指数。空气减少公司在1978年成为 Buck 集团，当时被称为英国氧气公司的全资子公司。
You can determine profitability as measured by return on sales and return on capital by referring to the ratios section of Table 18.3. Net/sales measures return on sales. Earnings/book value measures return on capital.
你可以通过参考表18-3的比率部分来确定盈利能力，以销售回报和资本回报为衡量标准。净销售衡量销售回报，收益账面价值衡量资本回报。
Asterisk American Home Products Company is now known as Wyeth. The stock is included in the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index. American Hospital Supply Company was acquired by Baxter Healthcare Corporation in 1985.
星号美国家庭产品公司现在被称为怀亚斯，该股票被纳入标准普尔500股票指数。美国医院供应公司在1985年被贝克特医疗保健公司收购。
Asterisk nearly 30 times is reflected in the entry of 2,920% under price/book value in the ratios section of Table 18.4. Graham would have shaken his head in astonishment during late 1999 and early 2000, when many high-tech companies sold for hundreds of times their asset value. See the commentary on this chapter. Talk about almost unheard of in the annals of serious stock market valuations. H&R Block remains a publicly traded company, while Blue Bell was taken private in 1984 at $47.50 per share.
星号近30倍体现在表18-4的比率部分的价格账面价值下的2920条中。在1999年底和2000年初，许多高科技公司的股价是其资产价值的数百倍，这让格雷厄姆惊讶地摇头。参见本章的评论。谈论在严肃的股市估值记录中几乎闻所未闻。H&R Block 仍然是一家上市公司，而 Blue Bell 则在1984年以每股47.50美元的价格私有化。
Asterisk Graham is alerting readers to a form of the gambler's fallacy in which investors believe that an overvalued stock must drop in price purely because it is overvalued. Just as a coin does not become more likely to turn up heads after landing on tails for 9 times in a row, so an overvalued stock, or stock market, can stay overvalued for a surprisingly long time. That makes short selling, or betting that stocks will drop, too risky for mere mortals.
星号格雷厄姆在提醒读者注意一种赌徒谬误，即投资者认为一只被高估的股票必须因为被高估而下跌。就像一枚硬币在连续9次落在尾面后，并不会增加下次落在正面的可能性一样，一只被高估的股票或股市可能会被高估一个令人惊讶的长时间。这使得做空或者说压住股票会下跌，对于普通人来说风险过大。
International Harvester was the heir to McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, the manufacturer of the McCormick Reaper that helped make the Midwestern states the breadbasket of the world. But International Harvester fell on hard times in the 1970s and, in 1985, sold its farm equipment business to Tenneco. After changing its name to Navistar, the remaining company was booted from the Dow in 1991, although it remains a member of the S&P 500 index. International Flavors and Fragrances, also a constituent of the S&P 500, had a total stock market value of $3 billion in early 2003 versus $1.6 billion for Navistar.
国际收割机公司是麦克米克收割机公司的继承者，该公司生产的麦克米克收割机帮助中西部各州成为世界的面包篮。但是在1970年代，国际收割机公司陷入困境，并在1985年将其农业设备业务出售给田纳科。在更名为纳维斯塔尔后，该公司在1991年被道琼斯指数剔除，尽管它仍然是标准普尔500指数的成员。国际香料和香精公司也是标准普尔500指数的成分股，其在2003年初的总市值为30亿美元，而纳维斯塔尔的市值为16亿美元。
Asterisk 4 more of Graham's thoughts on shareholder activism. See the commentary on Chapter 19. In criticizing Harvester for its refusal to maximize shareholder value, Graham uncannily anticipated the behavior of the company's future management. In 2001, a majority of shareholders voted to remove Navistar's restrictions against outside takeover bids, but the board of directors simply refused to implement the shareholders' wishes. It's remarkable that an anti-democratic tendency in the culture of some companies can endure for decades.
星号关于格雷厄姆对股东激进主义的更多想法，请参见第19章的评论。在批评收割机公司拒绝最大化股东价值的行为时，格雷厄姆预见到了该公司未来管理层的行为。在2001年，大多数股东投票决定取消纳维斯塔尔对外部收购出价的限制，但董事会却简单地拒绝执行股东的意愿。一些公司文化中的反民主倾向能够持续数十年，这是令人惊讶的。
McGraw-Hill remains a publicly traded company that owns, among other operations, Businessweek magazine and Standard & Poor's Corporation. McGraw-Edison is now a division of Cooper Industries.
星号麦格劳希尔仍然是一家上市公司，拥有 Businessweek 杂志和标准普尔公司等业务。麦格劳爱迪生现在是库珀工业的一个部门。
In the May 1970 debacle that Graham refers to, the U.S. stock market lost 5.5%. From the end of March to the end of June 1970, the S&P 500 index lost 19% of its value, one of the worst three-month returns on record.
星号格雷厄姆提到的1970年5月的灾难，美国股市下跌了 5.5%。从1970年3月底到6月底，标准普尔500指数的价值下跌了 19%， 这是有记录以来最糟糕的3个月回报之一。
National Presto remains a publicly traded company. National General was acquired in 1974 by another controversial conglomerate, American Financial Group, which at various times has had interests in cable television, banking, real estate, mutual funds, insurance, and bananas. NFG is also the final resting place of some of the assets of Penn Central Corporation. See Chapter 17.
星号 National Presto 仍然是一家上市公司。National General 在1974年被另一家有争议的大型企业美国金融集团收购，该集团在不同的时间拥有有线电视、银行、房地产、共同基金、保险和香蕉等业务。美国金融集团也是宾夕法尼亚中央公司参见第17章的一些资产的最终归宿。
Whiting Corporation ended up a subsidiary of Wheelabrator Fry, but was taken private in 1983. Wilcox and Gibbs is now owned by Group Rexel, an electrical equipment manufacturer that is a division of Pinot Printemps Redoute Group of France. Rexel's shares trade on the Paris Stock Exchange.
星号 Whiting 公司最终成为 Wheelabrator Fry 的子公司，但在1983年被私有化。Wilcox 与 Gibbs 现在由法国 Pinot Printemps Redoute 集团的电气设备制造商 Rexel 集团所有。Rexel 的股票在巴黎股票交易所上市。
One, ask yourself which company's stock would be likely to rise more. One that discovered a cure for a rare cancer, or one that discovered a new way to dispose of a common kind of garbage. The cancer cure sounds more exciting to most investors, but a new way to get rid of trash would probably make more money. See Paul Slovic, Melissa Finucane, Ellen Peters, and Donald G. McGregor, The Effect Heuristic, and Thomas Gilovich, Dale Griffin, and Daniel Kahneman, eds, Heuristics and Biases, The Psychology of Intuitive Judgment, Cambridge University Press, New York, 2002. Pages 397 to 420, and Donald G. McGregor, Imagery and Financial Judgment, The Journal of Psychology and Financial Markets, Volume 3, Number 1, 2002, pages 15 to 22.
一问问自己，哪家公司的股票可能会更有可能上涨？一家发现了一种罕见癌症的治疗方法的公司，还是一家发现了一种新的处理常见垃圾的方法的公司？对大多数投资者来说，癌症治疗听起来更令人兴奋，但是一种新的处理垃圾的方法可能会赚更多的钱。参见 Paul Slovic、Melissa Finucane、Ellen Peters 和 Donald G. McGregor, The Effect Heuristic 在 Thomas Gilovich、Dale Griffin 和 Daniel Kahneman 编辑 Heuristics and Biases, The Psychology of Intuitive Judgment, Cambridge University Press, New York, 2002, 页数397420和 Donald G. McGregor, Imagery and Financial Judgment, The Journal of Psychology and Financial Markets 卷3第1期 Part19 页数之5 Part12
Two serial acquirers, which grow largely by buying other companies, nearly always meet a bad end on Wall Street. See the commentary on Chapter 17 for a longer discussion.
二连续收购者主要通过收购其他公司来增长，几乎总是在华尔街遭遇糟糕的结局。关于这个问题的更长讨论，请参见第17章的评论。
3. Jeremy Siegel, Big Cap Tech Stocks Are a Sucker's Bet. Wall Street Journal, March 14, 2000, available at www.jeremysiegel.com.
三杰里米·西格尔，大型科技股是傻瓜的赌注。华尔街日报，2000年3月14日，可在3w.jeremysiegel.com 查看。
For Yahoo, stock split 2-for-1 in February 2000. The share prices given here are not adjusted for that split in order to show the levels the stock actually traded at. But Yahoo's percentage return and market value, as cited here, do reflect the split.
四雅虎的股票在2000年2月进行了2:1的拆股，这里给出的股价并未调整这次拆股，以显示股票实际交易的水平。但是，这里引用的雅虎的百分比回报和市值确实反映了拆股。
5. Counting the effect of acquisitions, Yahoo's revenues were $464 million. Graham criticizes high P/E ratios in, among other places, Chapters 7 and 11.
5计算收购的影响，雅虎的收入为4.64亿美元。格雷厄姆在第7章和第11章以及其他地方批评了高市盈率。
6. Yum was then known as Tricon Global Restaurants Incorporated, although its ticker symbol was Yum. The company changed its name officially to Yum Brands Incorporated in May 2002.
6样当时被称为 Tricon Global Restaurants Inc.， 尽管其股票代码是 Yum。该公司在2002年5月正式更名为 Yum Brands Inc.
7. C CEO speaks and the bottom line, money, May 2000, pages 42 to 44.
7参见 CEO 发言和底线金钱杂志2000年5月第42-44页。
8. In early 2003, Capital One's chief financial officer resigned after securities regulators revealed that they might charge him with violations of laws against insider trading.
8在2003年初 Capital One 的首席财务官在证券监管机构透露，他们可能会以违反内幕交易法律的罪名起诉他后辞职。
9. For a more advanced look at this bizarre event, see O&A, Lamont and Richard H. Thaler, Can the Market Add and Subtract? National Bureau of Economic Research Working Paper Number 8302 at www.nber.org/papers/W8302.
9对于这个奇怪的事件的更深入的观察，请参见 O&A Lamont 和 Richard H. Thaler 的《市场能否加减》。国家经济研究局工作论文第8302号，网址为 3w.northbyeaststar.org/papers/w8302。
10. CMGI began corporate life as College Marketing Group, which sold information about college professors and courses to academic publishers, a business that bore a faint but disturbing similarity to national student marketing. Discussed by Graham on page 235.
10 CMGI 最初是作为 College Marketing Group 开始的公司生涯。该公司向学术出版商出售有关大学教授和课程的信息，这是一种与格雷厄姆在第235页讨论的 National Student Marketing 有些微妙但令人不安的相似性的业务。
11. All stock prices for Red Hat are adjusted for its 2-for-1 stock split in January 2000.
11所有 Red Hat 的股票价格都已经调整了2000年1月的2:1拆股。
12. Ironically, 65 years earlier Graham had singled out Brown Shoe as one of the most stable companies on the New York Stock Exchange. See the 1934 edition of Security Analysis, page 159.
12讽刺的是，65年前，格雷厄姆曾将 Brown Shoe 列为纽约证券交易所最稳定的公司之一。参见1934年版的证券分析第159页。
13. We use a 9-month period only because Red Hat's 12-month results could not be determined from its financial statements without including the results of acquisitions.
13我们只使用9个月的期间，因为如果不包括收购的结果，无法从红帽公司的财务报表中确定其12个月的业绩。
Ironically, takeovers began drying up shortly after Graham's last revised edition appeared, and the 1970s and early 1980s marked the absolute low point of modern American industrial efficiency. Cars were lemons, televisions and radios were constantly on the fritz, and the managers of many publicly traded companies ignored both the present interests of their outside shareholders and the future prospects of their own businesses. All of this began to change in 1984, when independent oilman T. Boone Pickens launched a hostile takeover bid for Gulf Oil. Soon, fueled by junk bond financing provided by Drexel Burnham Lambert, corporate raiders stalked the landscape of corporate America, scaring long-sclerotic companies into a new regimen of efficiency. While many of the companies involved in buyouts and takeovers were ravaged, the rest of American business emerged both leaner, which was good, and meaner, which sometimes was not.
幸好讽刺的是，收购活动在格雷厄姆最后一次修订版出版后不久就开始枯竭。1970年代和1980年代初是现代美国工业效率的绝对低谷。汽车是柠檬，电视和收音机总是出故障。许多上市公司的经理人忽视了他们的外部股东的现在的利益和他们自己的业务的未来前景。所有这些在1984年开始改变。当时独立石油商 T. Boone Pickens 发起了对海湾石油公司的敌意收购。很快，由德雷克斯尔伯纳姆兰伯特提供的垃圾债券融资推动，公司掠夺者在美国公司的景观中横行，使长期硬化的公司进入新的效率制度。虽然许多参与收购和接管的公司被破坏，但美国的其他企业变得更加精简，这是好的，和更加严厉，这有时候不是。
The irony that Graham describes here grew even stronger in the 1990s, when it almost seemed that the stronger the company was, the less likely it was to pay a dividend, or for its shareholders to want one. The payout ratio, or the percentage of their net income that companies paid out as dividends, dropped from 60% to 75% in Graham's day to 35% to 40% by the end of the 1990s.
幸好格雷厄姆在这里描述的讽刺在1990年代变得更强，当时几乎看起来公司越强大，就越不可能支付股息，或者股东们就越不希望得到股息。派息比率，或公司将其净收入的百分比支付为股息的比率，从格雷厄姆的时代的 60% 到 75% 下降到1990年代末的 35% 到 40%。
In the late 1990s, technology companies were particularly strong advocates of the view that all of their earnings should be plowed back into the business, where they could earn higher returns than any outside shareholder possibly could by reinvesting the same cash if it were paid out to him or her in dividends. Incredibly, investors never questioned the truth of this patronizing daddy knows best principle or even realized that a company's cash belongs to the shareholders, not its managers. See the commentary on this chapter.
幸好在1990年代末，科技公司特别强烈地主张，他们所有的收益都应该重新投入到业务中，在那里他们可以获得比任何外部股东通过重新投资相同的现金，如果它被支付给他或他作为股息可能获得的更高的回报。令人难以置信的是，投资者从未质疑这个居高临下的父亲最懂得原则的真实性，甚至没有意识到公司的现金属于股东而不是经理人。请参阅本章的评论。
Superior Oil's stock price peaked at $2,165 per share in 1959, when it paid a $4 dividend. For many years, Superior was the highest-priced stock listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Superior, controlled by the Keck family of Houston, was acquired by Mobil Corporation in 1984.
幸好1959年，苏必利尔石油公司的股票价格达到每股2165美元的峰值，当时他支付了4美元的股息。多年来，苏必利尔一直是纽约证券交易所上市的股票中价格最高的。1984年，苏必利尔被休斯顿的 Keck 家族控制，被美孚公司收购。
Today, virtually all stock splits are carried out by a change in value. In a 2-for-1 split, one share becomes 2, each trading at half the former price of the original single share. In a 3-for-1 split, one share becomes 3, each trading at a third of the former price, and so on. Only in very rare cases is a sum transferred from earned surplus to capital account, as in Graham's day.
幸好今天几乎所有的股票拆分都是通过改变价值来进行的。在2:1的拆分中，一股变成2股， 每股的交易价格是原来单股的一半，在3:1的拆分中，一股变成3股，每股的交易价格是原来的1/3，等等。只有在非常罕见的情况下，才会有一笔款项从留存收益转入资本账户，就像在格雷厄姆的时代一样。
Rule 703 of the New York Stock Exchange governs stock splits and stock dividends. The NYSE now designates stock dividends of greater than 25% and less than 100% as partial stock splits. Unlike in Graham's day, these stock dividends may now trigger the NYSE's accounting requirement that the amount of the dividend be capitalized from retained earnings.
纽约证券交易所的703规则规定了股票拆分和股息。纽约证券交易所现在将大于 25% 且小于 100% 的股息定为部分股票拆分。与格雷厄姆的时代不同，这些股息现在可能触发纽约证券交易所的会计要求，即股息金额必须从留存收益中资本化。
This policy, already unusual in Graham's day, is extremely rare today. In 1936 and again in 1950, roughly half of all stocks on the NYSE paid a so-called special dividend. By 1970, however, that percentage had declined to less than 10% and, by the 1990s, was well under 5%. See Harry D'Angelo, Linda D'Angelo, and Douglas J. Skinner, Special Dividends and the Evolution of Dividend Signaling, Journal of Financial Economics, Volume 57, Number 3, September 2000. Pages 309 to 354. The most plausible explanation for this decline is that corporate managers became uncomfortable with the idea that shareholders might interpret special dividends as a signal that future profits might be low.
星号这种政策在格雷厄姆的时代就已经很少见，今天更是极其罕见。在1936年和1950年，纽约证券交易所上所有股票中，大约有一半支付了所谓的特别股息。然而，到了1970年，这个比例已经下降到不到10%；到了1990年代，这个比例已经远低于5%。参见 Harry D'Angelo、Linda D'Angelo 和 Douglas J. Skinner 的文章《特别股息和股息信号的演变》，金融经济学杂志第57卷第3号，2000年9月第309-354页。这种下降的最可能的解释是，公司经理人对股东可能将特别股息解释为未来利润可能较低的信号这个想法感到不安。
The academic criticism of dividends was led by Merton Miller and Franco Modigliani, whose influential article Dividend Policy, Growth, and the Valuation of Shares 1961 helped win them Nobel Prizes in economics. Miller and Modigliani argued, in essence, that dividends were irrelevant, since an investor should not care whether his return comes through dividends and a rising stock price, or through a rising stock price alone, so long as the total return is the same in either case.
对股息的学术批评由 Merton Miller 和 Franco Modigliani 领导，他们的有影响力的文章《股息政策、增长和股份估值》1961帮助他们赢得了诺贝尔经济学奖。Miller 和 Modigliani 的论点实质上是，股息是无关紧要的，因为投资者不应该关心它的回报是通过股息和股价上涨，还是仅通过股价上涨获得，只要在任何情况下总回报是相同的。
Graham's argument is no longer valid, and today's investors can safely skip over this passage. Shareholders no longer need to worry about having to break up a stock certificate, since virtually all shares now exist in electronic rather than paper form. And when Graham says that a 5% increase in a cash dividend on 100 shares is less probable than a constant dividend on 105 shares, it's unclear how he could even calculate that probability.
星号格雷厄姆的论点已经不再有效，今天的投资者可以安全地跳过这段话。股东们不再需要担心不得不拆分股票证书，因为现在几乎所有的股份都以电子形式存在，而不是纸质形式。当格雷厄姆说100股的现金股息增加 5% 比105股的股息保持不变更可能时，不清楚他是如何计算那个概率的。
Subscription rights, often simply known as rights, are used less frequently than in Graham's day. They confer upon an existing shareholder the right to buy new shares, sometimes at a discount to market price. A shareholder who does not participate will end up owning proportionately less of the company. Thus, as is the case with so many other things that go by the name of rights, some coercion is often involved. Rights are most common today among closed-end funds and insurance or other holding companies.
订阅权通常简称为权利，在格雷厄姆的时代比现在使用的少。他们赋予现有股东购买新股的权利，有时甚至可以低于市场价格。如果股东不参与，他将最终拥有公司的比例会相对减少。因此，就像许多其他被称为权利的事物一样，通常会涉及到一些强制性。如今，订阅权在封闭式基金、保险或其他控股公司中最为常见。
The administration of President George W. Bush made progress in early 2003 toward reducing the problem of double taxation of corporate dividends. Although it is too soon to know how helpful any final laws in this area will turn out to be. A cleaner approach would be to make dividend payments tax-deductible to the corporation, but that is not part of the proposed legislation.
信号乔治 ·W. 布什总统的政府在2003年初取得了减少公司股息双重征税问题的进展，尽管现在还无法确定这个领域的最终法律会有多大的帮助。更清晰的方法是让公司的股息支付可以抵扣税款，但这并不包括在提议的立法中。
1 Benjamin Graham, The Intelligent Investor, Harper and Row, New York, 1949, pages 217, 219, 240. Graham explains his reference to Jesus this way. In at least 4 parables in the Gospels, there is reference to a highly critical relationship between a man of wealth and those he puts in charge of his property. Most to the point are the words that a certain rich man speaks to his steward or manager, who is accused of wasting his goods. Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Luke 16:2. Among the other parables Graham seems to have in mind is Matt 25:15, 28.
一本杰明·格雷厄姆，聪明的投资者，哈珀与罗，纽约，1949，第217、219、240页。格雷厄姆这样解释他对耶稣的引用，在福音书中至少有4个预言提到了财富人士与他所委托管理财产的人之间的重要关系。最相关的是某个富人对他的管家或经理说的话，后者被指责浪费了他的财产，交出你的管家职务，因为你不能再做管家了。路加福音16:2。格雷厄姆似乎还想到了其他的预言，如马太福音25:15-28。
2 Benjamin Graham, A Questionnaire on Stockholder Management Relationship, The Analyst's Journal, 4th quarter, 1947, page 62. Graham points out that he had conducted a survey of nearly 600 professional security analysts and found that more than 95% of them believe that shareholders have the right to call for a formal investigation of managers whose leadership does not enhance the value of the stock. Graham adds dryly that such action is almost unheard of in practice. This, he says, highlights the wide gulf between what should happen and what does happen in shareholder management relationships.
两本杰明·格雷厄姆股东管理层关系问卷调查分析师杂志1947年第4季度第62页。格雷厄姆指出，他进行了一项针对近600名专业证券分析师的调查，发现超过 95% 的人认为股东有权要求对那些不能提升股票价值的管理者进行正式调查。格雷厄姆干巴巴地补充说，这种行动在实践中几乎闻所未闻。他说，这凸显了股东与管理层关系中应该发生的事情和实际发生的事情之间的巨大鸿沟。
3 Graham and Dodd, Security Analysis, 1934 edition, page 508.
3格雷厄姆和多德，证券分析，1934年版，第508页。
For the Intelligent Investor, 1949 edition, page 218.
4聪明的投资者，1949年版，第218页。
5 1949 edition, page 223. Graham adds that a proxy vote would be necessary to authorize an independent committee of outside shareholders to select the engineering firm that would submit its report to the shareholders, not to the board of directors. However, the company would bear the costs of this project. Among the kinds of engineering firms Graham had in mind were money managers, rating agencies, and organizations of security analysts. Today, investors could choose from among hundreds of consulting firms, restructuring advisors, and members of entities like the Risk Management Association.
1949年版，第223页。 格雷厄姆补充说，需要进行代理投票，以授权一个由外部股东组成的独立委员会选择工程公司，该公司将向股东提交报告，而不是向董事会提交。然而，这个项目的费用将由公司承担。格雷厄姆考虑的工程公司类型包括资金管理者、评级机构和证券分析师组织。如今，投资者可以从数百家咨询公司、重组顾问和风险管理协会等实体的成员中进行选择。
6 tabulations of voting results for 2002 by Georgeson Shareholder and ADP's Investor Communication Services, two leading firms that mail proxy solicitations to investors, suggest response rates that average around 80% to 88%, including proxies sent in by stockbrokers on behalf of their clients, which are automatically voted in favor of management unless the clients specify otherwise. Thus, the owners of between 12% and 20% of all shares are not voting their proxies. Since individuals own only 40% of U.S. shares by market value, and most institutional investors like pension funds and insurance companies are legally bound to vote on proxy issues, that means that roughly a third of all individual investors are neglecting to vote.
6. 根据 Georgeson Shareholder 和 ADP 的 Investor Communication Services 两家主要的向投资者邮寄代理邀请的公司对2002年投票结果的统计，反应率平均在 80% 到 88% 之间，包括由股票经纪人代表他们的客户发送的代理，除非客户另有指定，否则这些代理将自动投票支持管理层。因此，所有股份的 12% 到 20% 的所有者没有投票他们的代理。由于个人只拥有美国市值 40% 的股份，而大多数机构投资者如养老基金和保险公司在代理问题上都有法律义务投票，这意味着大约1/3的所有个人投资者都忽视了投票。
7 1949 edition, page 224.
7 1949年版，第224页。
8 1949 edition, page 233.
8 1949年版，第233页。
9 Eugene F. Fama and Kenneth R. French, Disappearing Dividends, Changing Firm Characteristics or Lower Propensity to Pay? Journal of Financial Economics, Volume 60, Number 1, April, 2001, pages 3 to 43, especially Table 1. See also Elroy Dimson, Paul Marsh, and Mike Staunton, Triumph of the Optimists, Princeton University Press. Princeton, 2002, pages 158 to 161. Interestingly, the total dollar amount of dividends paid by U.S. stocks has risen since the late 1970s, even after inflation, but the number of stocks that pay a dividend has shrunk by nearly 2/3. See Harry D'Angelo, Linda D'Angelo, and Douglas J. Skinner. Are dividends disappearing? Dividend Concentration and the Consolidation of Earnings, available at http://papers.ssrn.com.
九尤金、法马和肯尼斯、奥尔弗兰奇消失的股息，公司特性的变化还是支付意愿的降低。金融经济学杂志第60卷第1期，2001年4月第3-43页，特别是第一表，另见阿尔罗伊、迪姆森、保罗、马什和麦克斯陶顿《乐观主义者的胜利》，普林斯顿大学出版社，普林斯顿，2002年第158-161页。有趣的是，自1970年代末以来，美国股票支付的股息总额已经增加，即使考虑到通货膨胀，但是支付股息的股票数量已经减少了近2/3。参见哈里、德安杰洛、琳达、德安杰洛和道格拉斯、J. 斯金纳。股息正在消失吗？股息集中和收益的合并，可在以下网址查看：http://papers.ssrn.com。
10 Perhaps Benjamin Franklin, who was said to have carried his coins around in an asbestos purse so that money wouldn't burn a hole in his pocket, could have avoided this problem if he had been a CEO.
是也许本杰明·富兰克林，据说他把硬币放在石棉钱包里，以免钱烧穿他的口袋。如果他当过 CEO， 可能就能避免这个问题。
11A study by Businessweek found that from 1995 through 2001, 61% out of more than 300 large mergers ended up destroying wealth for the shareholders of the acquiring company, a condition known as the winner's curse or buyer's remorse, and acquirers using stock rather than cash to pay for the deal underperformed rival companies by 8%. David Henry, Mergers, Why Most Big Deals Don't Pay Off, Businessweek, October 14, 2002, pages 60 to 70. A similar academic study found that acquisitions of private companies and subsidiaries of public companies lead to positive stock returns, but that acquisitions of entire public companies generate losses for the winning bidder's shareholders. Kathleen Fuller, Jeffrey Netter, and Mike Stiegemaller. What do returns to acquiring firms tell us? The Journal of Finance, Volume 57, Number 4, August 2002, pages 1763 to 1793.
11商业周刊的一项研究发现，从1995年到2001年，超过300家大公司中的61%的并购最终导致收购公司的股东财富减少。这种情况被称为赢家的诅咒或买家的后悔。而使用股票而不是现金支付交易的收购者的表现比竞争对手公司低 8%。 大卫·亨利并购为什么大部分大交易都不划算？商业周刊2002年10月14日第60-70页。一项类似的学术研究发现，收购私人公司和公开公司的子公司会带来正面的股票回报，但收购整个公开公司会给赢家的股东带来损失。凯瑟琳·富勒、杰弗里·内特、麦克斯特格莫勒收购公司的回报告诉我们什么？金融学杂志第57卷第4期，2002年8月第1763至1793页。
12 With interest rates near record lows, such a mountain of cash produces lousy returns if it just sits around. As Graham asserts, so long as this surplus cash remains with the company, the outside stockholder gets little benefit from it. 1949 edition, page 232. Indeed, by year-end 2002, Microsoft's cash balance had swollen to $43.4 billion, clear proof that the company could find no good use for the cash its businesses were generating. As Graham would say, Microsoft's operations were efficient, but its finance no longer was. In a step toward redressing this problem, Microsoft declared in early 2003 that it would begin paying a regular quarterly dividend.
12在利率接近历史低点的情况下，这样一座现金山如果只是闲置不用，就会产生糟糕的回报。正如格雷厄姆所断言的，只要这些多余的现金仍然在公司手中，外部股东就无法从中获益。1949版第232页。事实上，到2002年底，微软的现金余额已经膨胀到434亿美元，这明确证明该公司找不到对其业务产生的现金的好用途。正如格雷厄姆所说，微软的运营是高效的，但其财务已经不再是。为了解决这个问题，微软在2003年初宣布将开始支付定期季度股息。
13 Robert D. Arnott and Clifford S. Asness, surprise. Higher dividends equals higher earnings growth. Financial Analyst Journal, January/February 2003, pages 70 to 87.
13罗伯特 ·D. 阿诺特和克利福德 ·S. 阿斯尼斯，惊喜。更高的股息等于更高的收益增长。金融分析师杂志，2003年1/2月，第70-87页。
14 Doran Nissim and Amir Ziv, Dividend Changes and Future Profitability, The Journal of Finance, Volume 56, Number 6, December 2001, pages 2111 to 2133. Even researchers who disagree with the Arnott-Asness and Nissim-Ziv findings on future earnings agree that dividend increases lead to higher future stock returns. See Shlomo Benartzi, Roni Mikhaili, and Richard Thaler. Do changes in dividends signal the future or the past? The Journal of Finance, Volume 52, Number 3, July 1997, pages 1007 to 1034.
14多伦、尼西姆和阿米尔·齐夫，股息变化与未来的盈利能力。金融学杂志第56卷第6期，2001年12月，第21至2133页。即使是那些不同意阿诺特·阿斯尼斯和尼西姆·齐夫关于未来收益的研究结果的研究人员也同意，股息的增加会导致未来的股票回报率提高。参见舒洛莫·本纳奇、罗尼、米凯利和理查德·瑟勒。股息的变化是预示未来还是过去？金融学杂志第52卷第3期，1997年7月，第1007-1034页。
15 The tax reforms proposed by President George W. Bush in early 2003 would change the taxability of dividends, but the fate of this legislation was not yet clear by press time.
树乔治 布什总统在2003年初提出的税改方案将改变股息的税收性质，但这项立法的命运在新闻发布时还不清楚。
16. Historically, companies took a common-sense approach towards share repurchases, reducing them when stock prices were high and stepping them up when prices were low. After the stock market crash of October 19, 1987, for example, 400 companies announced new buybacks over the next 12 days alone. While only 107 firms had announced buyback programs in the earlier part of the year, when stock prices had been much higher. C. Murali Jagannathan, Clifford P. Stevens, and Michael S. Weisbach, Financial Flexibility in the Choice Between Dividends and Stock Repurchases, Journal of Financial Economics, Volume 57, Number 3, September, 2000. Page 362.
16历史上，公司对股票回购采取了常识性的方法，当股票价格高时减少回购，当价格低时增加回购。例如，1987年10月19日的股市崩盘后，仅在接下来的12天里，就有400家公司宣布了新的回购计划，而在年初股票价格较高的时候，只有107家公司宣布了回购计划。参见穆拉利、贾甘纳坦、克利夫德 ·P. 斯蒂芬斯和迈克尔 ·S. 韦斯巴赫财务灵活性与选择股息和股票回购之间的选择，金融经济学杂志第57卷第3期，2000年9月第362页。
17. The stock options granted by a company to its executives and employees give them the right, but not the obligation, to buy shares in the future at a discounted price. That conversion of options to shares is called exercising the options. The employees can then sell the shares at the current market price and pocket the difference as profit. Because hundreds of millions of options may be exercised in a given year, the company must increase its supply of shares outstanding. Then, however, the company's total net income would be spread across a much greater number of shares, reducing its earnings per share. Therefore, the company typically feels compelled to buy back other shares to cancel out the stock issued to the option holders. In 1998, 63.5% of chief financial officers admitted that counteracting the dilution from options was a major reason for repurchasing shares. See CFO Forum, The Buyback Track. Institutional Investor, July. 1998.
17公司授予其高管和员工的股票期权，赋予他们未来以折扣价格购买股票的权利，但不是义务。将期权转换为股票被称为行使期权。然后，员工可以以当前市场价格出售股票，并将差价作为利润收入。由于在1年中可能会行使数亿个期权，公司必须增加其流通股份的供应。然后，公司的总净收入将分摊到更多的股份上，从而降低其每股收益。因此，公司通常会感到有必要回购其他股份，以抵消发给期权持有者的股份。在1998年，63.5%的首席财务官承认，抵消期权稀释是回购股份的主要原因。参见 CFO 论坛回购轨迹机构投资者1998年7月。
18. One of the main factors driving this change was the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's decision, in 1982, to relax its previous restrictions on share repurchases. See Gustavo Grullón and Roni Mikhaili, Dividends, Share Repurchases, in the Substitution Hypothesis, The Journal of Finance, Volume 57, Number 4, August, 2002, pages 1649 to 1684.
18导致这种变化的主要因素之一是，美国证券交易委员会在1982年决定放宽对股票回购的以前的限制。参见古斯塔沃·格鲁隆和罗尼·米凯利《股息、股票回购和替代假设》金融学杂志第57卷第4期，2002年8月第1649至1684页。
19. Throughout his writings, Graham insists that corporate managements have a duty not just to make sure their stock is not undervalued, but also to make sure it never gets overvalued. As he put it in Security Analysis, 1934 edition, page 515, the responsibility of managements to act in the interest of their shareholders includes the obligation to prevent, insofar as they are able, the establishment of either absurdly high or unduly low prices for their securities. Thus, enhancing shareholder value doesn't just mean making sure that the stock price does not go too low. It also means ensuring that the stock price does not go up to unjustifiable levels. If only the executives of internet companies had heeded Graham's wisdom back in 1999.
19在他的著作中，格雷厄姆坚持认为，公司管理层不仅有责任确保他们的股票不被低估，而且还要确保它永远不会被高估。正如他在《证券分析》1934年版第515页中所说，管理层有责任为股东利益行事，包括有义务防止在他们能力范围内，他们的证券价格被定得过高或过低。因此，提高股东价值不仅意味着确保股票价格不会过低，也意味着确保股票价格不会上升到无法证明的水平。如果互联网公司的高管们在1999年时能听从格雷厄姆的智慧就好了。
20 Incredibly, although options are considered a compensation expense on a company's tax returns, they are not counted as an expense on the income statement in financial reports to shareholders. Investors can only hope that accounting reforms will change this ludicrous practice.
20令人难以置信的是，尽管期权在公司的税务申报中被视为一项补偿费用，但在向股东报告的财务报表的收入表中，它们并未被计入费用。投资者只能希望会计改革能改变这种荒谬的做法。
21C George W. Finn and Nellie Leong, Corporate Payout Policy and Managerial Stock Incentives, Journal of Financial Economics, Volume 60, Number 1, April, 2001, pages 45 to 72. Dividends make stocks less volatile by providing a stream of current income that cushions shareholders against fluctuations in market value. Several researchers have found that the average profitability of companies with stock buyback programs, but no cash dividends, is at least twice as volatile as that of companies that pay dividends. Those more variable earnings will, in general, lead to bouncier share prices, making the manager's stock options more valuable by creating more opportunities when share prices will be temporarily high. Today, about 2/3 of executive compensation comes in the form of options and other non-cash awards. 30 years ago, at least 2/3 of compensation came as cash.
21参见 George W. Finn 和 Nellie Leong 的文章《公司派息政策与管理层股票激励：金融经济学杂志》2001年4月第60卷第1期第45-72页。股息通过提供一种当前收入流，使股票的波动性降低，从而为股东抵消市值的波动。一些研究人员发现，实施股票回购计划但不支付现金股息的公司的平均盈利率至少是支付股息公司的2倍。这些更多的可变收益通常会导致股价的波动性增加，从而使管理层的股票期权更有价值，因为它创造了更多的机会使股票价格暂时上升。如今，大约2/3的高管薪酬以期权和其他非现金奖励的形式发放，而30年前至少有2/3的薪酬是现金。
22 Apple Computer Incorporated Proxy Statement for April 2001 Annual Meeting, page 8, available at www.sec.gov. Jobs option grant and share ownership are adjusted for a 2-for-1 share split.
22苹果电脑公司2001年4月年度会议的代理声明，第8页，可在3w.sec.gov 查看。乔布斯的期权授予和股份所有权已经调整为1:1的股份拆分。
By the late 1990s, this advice, which can be appropriate for a foundation or endowment with an infinitely long investment horizon, had spread to individual investors, whose lifespans are finite. In the 1994 edition of his influential book, Stocks for the Long Run, finance professor Jeremy Siegel of the Wharton School recommended that risk-taking investors should buy on margin, borrowing more than 1/3 of their net worth to sink 135% of their assets into stocks. Even government officials got in on the act. In February 1999, the Honorable Richard Dixon, State Treasurer of Maryland, told the audience at an investment conference, "It doesn't make any sense for anyone to have any money in a bond fund."
幸好到了20世纪90年代末，这个建议对于一个投资期限无限长的基金或捐赠机构来说可能是合适的，已经传播到个人投资者中，他们的寿命是有限的。在他的影响力巨大的书《长期持有的股票》1994年版中，沃顿商学院的金融学教授杰里米·西格尔建议愿意冒险的投资者应该使用保证金购买借款超过他们净资产的1/3，将他们的资产的135%投入到股票中。甚至政府官员也参与其中。1999年2月，马里兰州财政部长理查德·迪克森在一个投资会议上对听众说：“ 任何人都不应该把钱投入债券基金，这没有任何意义。
This is one of Graham's rare misjudgments. In 1973, just 2 years after President Richard Nixon imposed wage and price controls, inflation hit 8.7%, its highest level since the end of World War II. The decade from 1973 through 1982 was the most inflationary in modern American history, as the cost of living more than doubled.
幸好这是格雷厄姆少有的误判之一。1973年，理查德·尼克松总统实施工资和价格控制，仅2年后，通货膨胀率达到 8.7%， 这是二战结束以来的最高水平。从1973年到1982年的10年间，是现代美国历史上最具通货膨胀性的10年，生活成本翻了一番多。
See page 25.
星号参见第25页。
John Pierpont Morgan was the most powerful financier of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Because of his vast influence, he was constantly asked what the stock market would do next. Morgan developed a mercifully short and unfailingly accurate answer. It will fluctuate. See Gene Strauss, Morgan, American Financier, Random House, 1999, page 11.
星号约翰·皮尔庞特·摩根是19世纪末和20世纪初最有权力的金融家。由于他的影响力巨大，他经常被问到股市接下来会怎么走。摩根给出了一个非常简短且始终准确的答案：它会波动。参见 Gene Strauss 的《摩根：美国金融家》Random House 1999第11页。
The investment philosopher Peter L. Bernstein feels that Graham was dead wrong about precious metals, particularly gold, which, at least in the years after Graham wrote this chapter, has shown a robust ability to outpace inflation. Financial advisor William Bernstein agrees, pointing out that a tiny allocation to a precious metals fund, say 2% of your total assets, is too small to hurt your overall returns when gold does poorly. But when gold does well, its returns are often so spectacular, sometimes exceeding 100% in a year, that it can, all by itself, set an otherwise lackluster portfolio glittering. However, the intelligent investor avoids investing in gold directly, with its high storage and insurance costs. Instead, seek out a well-diversified mutual fund specializing in the stocks of precious metal companies and charging below 1% in annual expenses. Limit your stake to 2% of your total financial assets, or perhaps 5% if you are over the age of 65.
星号投资哲学家彼得 ·L. 伯恩斯坦认为，格雷厄姆对于贵金属，特别是黄金的看法完全错误，因为至少在格雷厄姆写这一章之后的几年里，黄金已经显示出强大的能力来超越通货膨胀。金融顾问威廉·伯恩斯坦同意这一点，他指出，将一小部分资产，比如说你总资产的2%，分配给贵金属基金，即使黄金表现不佳，也不会对你的总回报产生太大影响。但是，当黄金表现良好时，其回报通常是如此惊人，有时1年内超过100%，它可以独自让一个表现平平的投资组合闪闪发光。然而，聪明的投资者避免直接投资黄金，因为其高昂的存储和保险成本。相反，寻找一个专门投资贵金属公司股票的、年费用低于1%的多元化共同基金。将你的投资限制在你的总金融资产的2%，或者如果你已经超过65岁，可以是5%。
The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which calculates the consumer price index that measures inflation, maintains a comprehensive and helpful website at www.bls.gov/cpi/home.hdm.
以美国劳工统计局负责计算衡量通货膨胀的消费者价格指数，维护了一个全面且有用的网站，网址为 www.bls.gov/cpi/home.htm。
For a lively discussion of the inflation is dead scenario, see www.pbs.org/newshour/bb/economy/July, Dec 97/inflation_12-16.html. In 1996, the Boskin Commission, a group of economists asked by the government to investigate whether the official rate of inflation is accurate, estimated that it has been overstated, often by nearly 2 percentage points per year. For the Commission's report, see www.ssa.gov/history/reports/boskinrpt.html. Many investment experts now feel that deflation, or falling prices, is an even greater threat than inflation. The best way to hedge against that risk is by including bonds as a permanent component of your portfolio. See the commentary on Chapter 4.
2. 关于通货膨胀已死这一情景的热烈讨论，请参见 www.pbs.org/news/bec/July-bec/July-inflation-12-16.html。1996年，政府要求一组经济学家组成的波斯金委员会调查官方通货膨胀率是否准确。他们估计通货膨胀率被高估了，通常每年高出近2个百分点。关于委员会的报告，请参见 www.ssa.gov/history/reports/bostonrpt.html。许多投资专家现在认为，通货紧缩或者说价格下跌比通货膨胀更大的威胁。对抗这种风险的最好方法是将债券作为你投资组合的永久性组成部分。参见第4章的评论。
3. For more insights into this behavioral pitfall, see Eldar Shaffer, Peter Diamond, and Amos Tversky, Money Illusion, and Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, eds, Choices, Values, and Frames, Cambridge University Press, 2000. Pages 335 to 355.
3. 关于这种行为陷阱的更多见解，请参见 Eldar Shaffer、Peter Diamond 和 Amos Tversky 的货币错觉，收录在 Daniel Kahneman 和 Amos Tversky 编辑的《选择、价值和框架》，剑桥大学出版社，2000年，第335-355页。
For that year, President Jimmy Carter gave his famous Malaise speech, in which he warned of a crisis in confidence that strikes at the very heart and soul and spirit of our national will, and threatens to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
那一年，吉米·卡特总统发表了他著名的萎靡不振演讲，他警告说，信心危机直击我们国家意志的心脏、灵魂和精神，并威胁着摧毁美国的社会和政治结构。